Hi, and welcome to The Seeker
and The Skeptic.
I'm Kat, and I'm the flaky, unpredictable, irrational seeker.
And I'm Rebecca. I'll be your sarcastic, grumpy, close-minded, skeptical host. Or maybe we should just be ourselves.
Sounds good to me. This podcast is going to dive deep into controversial topics that some may call new age or woo-woo, or just plain foolish.
And look at them with a skeptical but open-minded approach that will hopefully encourage understanding and acceptance from both the skeptics
and the seekers. This episode, we're talking about the most famous British conspiracy theorist, David Icke.
So for the three of you out there who haven't heard of David Icke, he was a professional footballer who became a TV presenter and a spokesperson for the Green Party.
Then, around 1990, he started talking and writing about his grand conspiracy theory. And now he's written at least 20 books on this subject, and he lectures to audiences of thousands.
He kicked off this part of his career, the conspiracy stuff, with an interview on a really popular talk show where he announced he was the Messiah.
Which he is, right?
Yeah. Well, he's certainly a pretty interesting guy. I don't know, as a skeptic, David Icke is like a joke. That sounds harsh, but it's true. He's the extreme that everyone goes to. So when you talk about conspiracy theories, you're like, oh, you know, they believe that the government is controlled by the Illuminati and blah, blah, blah. And then there's reptilians and the Queen's a reptile. And it's kind of like a... I don't know, it's like an exaggerated version. It's like a unkind portrayal of conspiracy theories so we can write them all off as nonsense. So I never bothered really engaging with this stuff, although I do have a book, Children of the Matrix. We'll put a pic up on our social media of Kat reading it maybe. I bought a book as a joke for my partner like 10 years ago, but I flicked through that book, but I haven't thought about him at all until Kat said, hey, he's on tour, why don't we go see him?
Yeah, I guess I had first heard about him just after graduating, when I was just like looking around. I think I'd watched the film Zeitgeist. And once you kind of start pulling at this thread of society isn't what you think. Yeah. Then I just kept pulling. And I did come across him, but kind of dismissed him. Even as a seeker, I did dismiss anyone who's talking about real life reptilian people. And
that's what he's known for, isn't it? Like, if you think David Icke, everyone who doesn't know anything about David Icke thinks David Icke, reptiles, reptiloids, whatever. You don't, like, there's actually a lot more madness in his theory, but that's what he's famous for.
Yeah, and it was interesting on the run-up to, so we're going to talk about the experience we had with David Icke. But I just remember...
That sounds a lot more intimate than actually the experience we had with David Icke.
I'm actually picking it up. It's nothing that intimate. But a week or two before, I was overheard on a train by a gentleman. I was telling a friend, oh, I'm going to see David Icke, kind of laughing about it. And a man heard that and said, oh, David Icke, you know, and he kind of got involved in our conversation. And to him, straight away, he didn't want to talk about the reptile theory. He was like, David Icke's my man. And... It was really interesting to sort of hear from somebody who's clearly a fan that there is definitely more to this person.
So you're talking to your friend on the train, like telling her that you're going to go see David Icke?
Yeah. And a stranger in England gets involved in the conversation.
That is weird.
Rare.
Yeah, very rare. Although we were talking about this incident on the way. We drove to Margate to see him in Margate. And I was thinking, what's the common feature of someone who in England who would talk to someone on public transport is a very, very rare thing to do, and someone who, you know, is into David Icke? Like what personality trait do they have in common?
Yeah.
And you said openness?
Openness, without a doubt.
Yeah. And it was really interesting. We're going to get into this a bit later, but I read a book about the psychology of conspiracy theories. And this has actually been tested looking at the personality traits of conspiracy theorists. And openness isn't different across from people who don't and people who do believe. But one aspect of openness which is like rejection of conventional truth.
Right.
And like embracing the extraordinary and the strange. That aspect of openness is different. But across from like general population, normal people who don't believe in conspiracy theories compared to people who do believe in conspiracy theories, openness as a personality trait isn't different.
Yeah, it's like the other factors that make up openness aren't different. It's just this one specific thing.
Which is exactly the sort of thing which would lead you to defy social norms and talk to a random woman on a train.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Also, maybe he's hitting on you.
It's possible. He did mention his wife quite quickly, so...
Oh, okay. I was just thinking, if you're a David Icke fan, again, this is a conception that actually was violated when we went there. And if you're a bloke and you're a David Icke fan, finding a woman who believes in David Icke too...
That must be a great moment.
Well, you would think so, but then when we were there, it was actually more or less a 50-50 gender split.
Very much, yeah.
So do you want to give it, like, set it up? What was this like?
So it's a 4-hour show in a sold-out venue in Margate with a capacity of about 1,400. So, and this is just one of his many stops.
And Margate's a little seaside town. It's kind of slightly run down.
Yeah, slightly.
Although I think they're gentrifying now, aren't they?
Sorry, Margatians. And it's called the Everything You Need to Know tour, which pretty much says it all. This is everything we need to know in 4 hours. Great value. I think around 30 odd quid.
Yeah, it was 30 quid each. That's not
really
bad for 4 hours.
Considering how much I've spent on seeing other speakers before. Let's mention no names. He's going to take... so he basically takes us through a 9-point plan of the Archon, which we'll discuss. The Archon's plan for world domination.
Yeah.
And then at the end, we have a little break, and then he wraps up with what we can do about this dastardly plan.
And we were, in the emails that we got after booking the tickets, there was advice about how to avoid protesters. So we were expecting protesters at this event, and we were kind of excited / nervous to meet them, because we thought, oh, brilliant, this will be really good for the podcast. We can talk to them, find out what they think, why they don't like David Icke, maybe get some of their literature, take photos of it. But unfortunately, there weren't any there. Because we were all, in the email, they said, oh, you want to park in this special car park and come in around a back entrance so you don't be bothered by the protesters, all this like...
And the venue wasn't announced until the day before?
Yeah, so we just booked tickets. We didn't know what the venue was. And they were like, we can't tell you the venue because then the protesters will come. So we go in the main entrance being like, great, this will be where the protesters are, because we've been told that that's where they'll be. And just nothing. In fact, it was kind of eerie. Maybe because everyone else was coming in through the back.
Yes.
It was just like, we're going to this empty venue, this huge venue, and there's no one there. And I just walk up to the lady at the little window, the ticket window, saying, hi, we're seeing David Icke.
Like whispering it.
But it sounded really loud because it's in this echoey, empty space.
It's also like, there's nothing else happening here. Of course you're going to see David Icke. So there was no way of escaping our shame.
So I sat... Oh, another thing, before he started talking, when we came in, there was a woman at the door taking our tickets, and we asked her about the protesters, and we said, oh, we were expecting protesters, but there weren't any protesters. And the lady said that there had been at previous events.
Yes.
In fact, she said...
Manchester, I think, was a big protest.
Yeah. She said that one of them, a protester dressed up as a lizard. And then she sort of rolled her eyes and went, how pathetic.
Yeah, pathetic. Isn't that... I mean, which is true. It is pathetic.
Yeah, although in the John Ronson documentary, The Lizards and the Jews, which is a great documentary about David Icke, we'll probably talk about it later, David Icke calls one of the protesters pathetic. I wonder whether it's like a catchphrase. Well, like the David Icke people say about...
I don't know, but it is a very Ickean word. Like, I think if you start watching a lot of his stuff and, him walking out on different chat shows and interviews, which he doesn't do a lot of. I think he's anyway, we'll talk about him as a person in a bit, but there are clips of him walking out and kind of saying something that isn't super offensive, but it is kind of something along the lines of, you're just being pathetic.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like, I'm frustrated, but I'm not going to get mad about this. She wasn't like calling them names or anything. It's just kind of...
She said it's ridiculous what they say, he says, because if they actually came here, they'd see that what they're writing in their literature isn't true.
I think it shows like a real strong belief. There's no doubt. So it's like, it's just like madness that they could even question.
But that just made me more frustrated that we hadn't met the protesters, because I want to hear what they say.
And read there.
Anyway, so I come in thinking I'll take notes, but it's incredibly dark. And then when he comes on stage, it gets even darker. So it's really hard to take notes. And I'm trying to write in the dark. Also, to be completely honest, we had a couple of glasses of wine beforehand. Dutch courage.
Weird Margatian wine that goes to your head.
Yeah, it really did. So we're coming in a little bit tipsy, a little bit grumpy, because we're tired from driving all the way. It's like a 2-hour drive.
It's freezing cold.
It's
really
freezing
windy.
cold, yeah. And now we're sitting in the dark and I'm trying to take notes. And the whole place stinks of Red Bull. Did you notice that?
No, not at all.
Really strong. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why is everyone here drinking Red Bull? And I was like, I understand. They've got to keep their attention going for 4 hours. It actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah. So the audience, again, not exactly what I expected. I know that from, the kind of people you guess are into David Icke, there's a general archetype of the conspiracy theorist, which is maybe an older white man, basically. you know, like you said, it was about a 50-50 split and plenty of women in the audience and different ages, I would say. There was a really good range.
And this is what this guy, Rob Brotherton, who wrote the book on the psychology of conspiracy theories that I read as preparation for this episode, said. It's pretty even, gender-wise, which is really surprising to me. I don't know why I have this image of conspiracy theorists as being male, but I definitely do.
Yeah, I mean, my assumption might have been something that we've discussed a bit before, which is this idea that men may be more interested in things and theories and women are more interested in people. But the brilliant thing about conspiracy theories is they have both.
Yeah, and also there's a lot of kind of conspiracy theories around like anti-vax, like thinking that vaccinations cause autism, which is ridiculous and maybe a subject of another episode. But that's an idea people have. And it's an idea that's very popular with women because women are the one who make the healthcare decisions generally for their kids. And, you know, it's preying on their fears about their children.
And many of the topics that are going to be covered by David Icke, they do affect, you know, everyone's decisions in society.
Yeah.
So there's that. So yeah, we were sat behind like a row of maybe like middle-aged, but
like 8 middle-aged women.
Yeah.
And we couldn't quite figure out how they were connected to each other.
I mean, there are so many questions I have about everyone in that audience. Like, how did you find out about him? And yeah, there are so many
thought
questions.
maybe those women were on some kind of work trip.
That makes like some sense.
But then what on earth, what could your business be that you would take all your colleagues out?
Maybe it's just like a really strange hen do, but it definitely wasn't.
It could be a hen do. That would be an amazing hen do.
I mean,
you should do that for your hen do.
Sure, to my imaginary man. Yeah. So, and again, we were surprised. I would say that, you know, if I was to just point out, they were predominantly white. That's
true. But to be fair, Margate is predominantly white. Although probably a little bit more diverse, racially diverse than where we live.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, it's England. It's not London. It's pretty white. Yeah. But yeah, I didn't see a single face that wasn't white at that place.
Yeah.
So we're waiting. We're all excited. We're in the dark. There's a smell of Red Bull. I've got my notes, desperately trying to note down, trying to do a sort of head count, get an idea of how many people there are, which I think there's like...
It's 1,000.
Yeah, maybe over, because I think I checked the website and they said the venue has a capacity of 1,400.
And you said it was sold out.
And it was sold out. So it's a big audience and everyone's sort of chattering excitedly. And I hear someone in the background saying... something along the lines of like, he's either completely mad or he's a charlatan and he's just making this up, or it's all true. And he has been proven right.
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
in the seats behind us was talking to someone. So this is like...
So people aren't all sold on...
No, I think a lot of people are like sold on some bits and not others.
Yeah, they're curious, yeah.
And then he comes on stage and he opens... Oh no, this is before he comes on stage. He starts playing a video.
This video, man.
Completely unexpected.
I was virtually in tears by the end of it. It was good.
It's Bob Marley's One Love. That's Bob Marley originally, right? But it's a performance that was done at in the Tower of David at Jerusalem on the last day of Ramadan, and they've got like 1,000 people, mixture of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all singing their own language.
Yeah, with like lights. Did they have lights?
Yeah, beautiful
Jesus,
lights
so
and shots of them all swaying, and shots of Jerusalem, and it's beautiful, and they're all singing One Love, and it's got the karaoke like words coming up underneath, so you could sing along if you wanted to, although no one is because we're British. Come on. Maybe if you did that at the end after we've all...
Yes, I think that would have been actually a good idea.
He could have done it at the beginning and the end.
Well, I think he should have just come out at the beginning, and I think at the end he should have had it, because
this is like
the ending was a bit of a...
This is going to be a theme for our David Icke experience, that we really want to stage manage David Icke.
Oh
We've
my
got
God.
loads of suggestions.
There are so many suggestions. We could really take him to the next level. But anyway, so that was a really nice start, and I thought, clever move. You are getting us... Well, it's what Tony Robbins does. You get people into a heightened state, like a particular type of emotion.
And also immediately saying, this is about love. I'm not, because of what's going around about him, what I'm sure the protesters would be saying is he's an anti-Semite.
Right.
So the first thing to put up there is like people of all different religions singing together. It's all about love. That's what's important. Just to get you in to know what I'm about. Yes. This is what I'm about. And I'll tell you about the reptiloids later.
You'll have this video, and then for the next 3 hours, I'll just instill a lot of fear, and then we'll wrap up on love again. It's a very interesting sandwich. It's the David Icke sandwich.
So the first thing he does is he sort of sets himself up as a maverick. In fact, I think he had like words flashing up on the screen like maverick. He was right. Everyone else was wrong. He's on his own. Oh, he's a hero. And early on he puts up the quote, which is actually, I checked this and it's not I didn't get down to where it actually came from, but it's falsely attributed to George Orwell. In a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. This is you, and you see him walk on, and he's there, and he's a very charismatic stage presence, which is weird because he's got like the same mullet he's had.
He looks like a dad,
forever.
basically. He's like the generic dad.
Really?
Well,
does the generic dad have that hair?
maybe not the mullet. Maybe
It's
not
white.
The mullet.
It's a mullet. It's like almost
It's a helmet.
shoulder length.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
He's a little bit overweight.
Yeah,
but he's
he's got like a dad body. It's brilliant.
Yeah, and he really he feels like as you guys might know, Kat and I met at Toastmasters, which is a public speaking group that teaches you how to do public speaking, and he would kill at Toastmasters.
Yeah, he really would.
Yeah.
He's doing all the things, and it seems to come very naturally to him.
Yeah.
I guess he's had years of doing it.
So he comes on and he starts talking about the famous Wogan interview,
Yes.
where he said he was the Messiah and everyone laughed at him.
Yeah.
And he basically says that this is what catalyzed him, what made him strong, what made him realize that he didn't have to care what anyone else thought, and he had to go and say the truth no matter what.
Which is fair, because I mean that does sound traumatizing. And when he talks about it, it's like it really did affect him. His like public, presence. Just if he was in the street, people would laugh at him, and maybe he's exaggerating, but it's pretty harsh. And I think even Terry Wogan, I don't know if he apologized, but he did admit that he was a little bit harsh.
It was. Have you watched that clip?
I think it would bring me to tears.
I feel really bad for David Icke because he's. I mean, I don't know what's going on with him mentally, but he's clearly troubled.
Yeah, and we'll talk about where he was at in his life at that time, which is fascinating. And yeah.
So then he goes on. So he's like, I'm the maverick. I'm saying the truth. I don't care what anyone thinks because I've been through the whatever it is, the fires, and I've come out the other side. I'm like the phoenix, and I'm just going to tell you what's going on.
And also, you're going to get it all of his like whatever 20 years of doing this in tonight's
in one
show.
download, as he probably would say. So, and he said tonight is all about context, connecting the dots, seeing the pattern. They want us to think everything's random, but it's not. So you've got this like, oh my God, I am going to hear the truth.
This is it. This
At
is all I need.
last, someone's putting it all together. Yeah. And then he starts through his 9-point plan. So I tried to write down, I haven't got all of it, but I can give you the quick rundown. So number 1, this is what they're going to do. They, and who they are will sort of emerge as we go. They want to control perception of reality. That's point 1. So we only see like a tiny part of reality. And that's actually true. Like the visible light spectrum is quite small.
Yeah, he does that thing of, and this comes up a lot, but he'll take a fragment of quite sensible science and twist it.
Extrapolate.
He will show you his point of view framed in this scientific fact.
And it sort of, it gives what he's saying more credence because you're like, oh, well, that is true. That is science.
Yeah, it's like bananas are yellow, therefore aliens are yellow. Like it almost doesn't make sense. If you actually looked at it doesn't actually follow.
And that's why he introduced us the concept of the postage stamp reality.
Oh,
which is this tiny, it's the size of a postage
analogy.
stamp. Yeah. That part of reality we can see. And he has all these images on his PowerPoint display. And oh my God, his PowerPoint display. This is another thing we had some tips for. Because the thing is, it's not bad. It's good, but it could be so much better.
Yeah, I mean, it's effective in that you do just want to see ridiculous images, but some of them are like, like it's like a baby crying. It's like really mad stuff. And with the classic David Ickean text, which is like a meme text.
Yeah. But as we learnt from our time in learning how to do public speaking, just putting what you're going to say in bullet points on a presentation is terrible. Yeah. Like, no one likes that. It's not good. Yeah. And what he does instead is just puts fun images up that illustrate his points, and then the occasional quote and shocking images, which I do actually think is a better way to do presentations. Yeah. But he's obviously got a real bee in his bonnet about VR. Because he has all these people with the VR goggles on, and then he's like photoshopped on the picture of a first-class postage stamp on the front of
with the reptilian queen.
So that's what they're seeing. They're just seeing what the reptilian queen wants them to see through this tiny little window, and they can't see the outside world. And so this is his idea that they are limiting our perception of reality. That's point 1. Point 2, hide the real controllers, provide fake leaders. And so this
introduces the idea of the pyramid, or no?
Oh my God, I don't know.
Okay, no, continue. I'm trying to remember.
There's so much he's throwing at us, and I'm missing out a lot. But he starts this, it's the same thing. He starts with a kind of a sensible thing. He says, it's crazy to think we're alone in the universe. Imagine how big, the universe is, and we think we're the only life. That's so arrogant. That's ridiculous. Therefore, there must be reptiloid aliens.
Dun, dun, dun. Obviously.
And that's why he introduced it. And he's right. Obviously, the universe is super big. It'd be weird if there wasn't any other life. I think it's probably quite likely that there is life.
He does that thing of kind of like, how foolish of us to think we're the only ones. It's that kind of, I'm just interested in like those techniques of almost like mocking.
He's inviting you to scoff at these silly people.
The scoff. Everyone loves a scoff.
Yeah. But to go from them, there might be, or there probably is, life somewhere out into the universe to, there is a race of reptiloids who are interfering with our political system and controlling our minds and feeding on our fear.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's where the logical leap comes in. But because he's such a good speaker and he just glides over it, you hardly even notice it. So he says, basically, everything was great. Humanity was having a gay old time, just roaming around and hunting and gathering. And then 4,000 years ago, there was like a wave of people who came up. And they are the Semitic people. And he makes a point to say that refers to a group of people who read and write and speak the Semitic languages, not Jews. So
here's when he's kind of like defending what he means by Semitic, which is really important because I think a lot of people don't know that, and that is a fact. Like, it's referring to
I had a quick Google, and that is what like archaeologists and people of that, it's not used in common language, so it may sound strange to us, but actually people who study that period would refer to them as the Semitic people. So he's not necessarily being anti-Semitic saying this. So these people, the Semitic people, they come up and all the people are having fun and living this life of plenty and stuff. And the Semitic people come and fuck everything up.
Yeah, but kind of like introducing like what we know as civilization.
Yes.
Is what I got. It's like that same argument that people use that before agriculture, everything was fine and dandy and like the women were equal to the men and like, or even above the men. And Jesus, it's the same argument.
Refer again to our lost episode, the goddess episode. Sorry to keep teasing you.
Yeah, teasing.
But it's true. When we were doing the goddess research, a lot of the goddess people think that before, like around 4,000 years ago, that's the date roughly, or sometimes it's 6,000 years ago, everything was great and women were in charge and everything was wonderful and that we worshipped a goddess. And then the people came, and they always come from somewhere, which is weird because it's like passing the buck. Like, if everything...
It was the outsiders. It was them, not us.
But who's them and who's us? Like, it's just mad. Anyway, they came along and they installed the patriarchy, which is what we have today, and it's terrible. And they installed a male god and a male whatever, and now we live in this horrible oppressive world. But before, like that thing, I think it's a very common thing in humans to look back to a sort of a
golden age, which David Icke
did
several times, but specifically about the 1950s. It was, I grew up in the 1950s and they didn't have that then. Exactly. Like it's a really strange, but it's a very common thing. It's like the idea of, it's actually conservative. The conservative view is to look back towards a golden age.
Yeah.
And progressive is to look forward. Anyway.
So he says, so this is point 2, hide the real controllers, provide fake leaders. So he starts off by telling you 4,000 years ago, everything was great. Then the Semitic people came, made everything shitty because, not just because they had culture, but because they were hybrid bloodline people. And we're like, okay, I'm listening, David, go on. So the hybrid people are half, or not half, but they're part extraterrestrial reptiloid, part human. And they're the same people who ended up controlling all of our banks and all of our politics and everything. But this is the early on stage where they're just coming.
Right.
And his point, hide the real controllers, provide fake leaders, is like, and then he shows you pictures of like Barack Obama and, different presidents and prime ministers from all over the world. It's all a dated slideshow because I don't think he had any modern leaders.
No, it was a lot like Obama. It was never like Trump. I don't think.
Yeah, and the Queen and stuff. So these people, we think they're the leaders, but they are actually just puppets of the reptiloids.
Yeah.
Okay, and then point number 3, pseudo randomness. That's, exactly. What the fuck does that mean?
Don't like the sound of that.
So this is basically, he says that what the reptiloids do, is I love the way I keep saying they. It's becoming like just normal to me to say this, but this is the way people talk. The way these people talk. The way they talk.
It's so easily done.
So they make everything political seem random, even though it's a perfectly orchestrated plan.
It's all part of their plan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you might be like, plane crash, what's that about? Tsunami, oh, I don't know about that. Donald Trump being elected, what's that about? It all seems random. Oh, the world's confusing. Shit's just happening. But actually, they planned all this stuff out and it's working to their agenda.
So he does tie in, obviously, into the Twin Towers, because he apparently predicted that.
Yeah, he says he predicted that. Yeah. I did do a bit of a search and I couldn't find anything. He said vague things about there being disasters.
He's made a lot of predictions, right? And that's what people have done.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. And this is when he brings up George Soros.
Oh, yeah.
Who's like, he's a philanthropist and a hedge fund manager, and he's involved in a lot of funding a lot of progressive political causes because that's his deal. He's also Jewish. Side note, irrelevant. I'm sure David Icke will tell you. Because he doesn't actually believe in Jews.
Right.
Because people are just people, right?
Unless they're reptiles.
Unless they're reptiles. People are people unless they're reptiles. Actually, that'd be a good t-shirt. So he says that George Soros is responsible for more death and destruction than anyone else in the world. And I was like, the name rings a bell.
And now, you know, when you say his name, I am picturing the slide, which is basically George Soros' face, but like with a kind of
reptile eyes,
which is really disturbing.
He flashed this up loads of times, and he had George Soros equals Dr. Evil or Mr. Evil or something.
It was really extreme. For somebody who I've never heard of until David Icke talked about him, I'm like, oh, he's a bad news.
I kind of knew he was like a big deal guy, but that was the limit of my knowledge of him. But apparently he is very well known by like right-wing Americans. They have loads of conspiracy theories about him. Okay. David Icke's not the only one who thinks that he's dodgy. They basically think that he's like trying to bring about the end of Western civilization by funding, because they all, like, he funds causes they don't like because they're right-wing and he's left-wing. And so they say, oh, he's like, I don't know, he's trying to bring about the end of the world by funding political things. So David Icke is tapping into a kind of another conspiracy theory that's already active. And he's just saying, yeah, you guys are right. This guy is evil. And also he's a reptiloid.
There's a lot of that. Let's tie in. And I guess this is the point of his tour, is like tying in all of these conspiracy theories, as many as he can, to all shape his main argument.
Yeah. And this, point 3, pseudo randomness, is the first recitation of his favorite catchphrase, which is know the outcome and you'll see the journey. He says this 6 more times because I started counting because I was like, he keeps saying this. Yeah. And so it's like a little tally in my book of how often he says it. Well, what he means is once you understand that it's the reptiloids, everything makes sense and you can see how it all fits together.
Right.
But it's a really interesting portrait of confirmation bias.
Yeah, it's literally saying that.
Yeah, he's saying if you know what you're looking for, you'll see it. And we're like, yes, that's called confirmation bias. It's a well-known psychological thing. For people who don't know, basically confirmation bias is our tendency to notice and remember things that confirm our beliefs and ignore or disregard things that don't.
It's like having any pre-existing idea and naturally on your day-to-day life, you're going to see evidence to support that.
Yeah, so if you get into your head that black cats are lucky or unlucky, then you remember the times you've seen a black cat and had a bad day, and you forget the times when you've seen a black cat and had a good day or, whatever. So you're literally just looking for evidence that confirms your idea, which is black cats are unlucky or lucky or whatever.
And he uses that to like support his argument.
It's so weird. It's like he's proud of it.
Yeah.
And I can't believe that he doesn't know. I mean, confirmation bias isn't... People must be sending him articles about it all the time.
Yeah.
So either he just ignores... I mean, that is...
He would ignore it.
He ignores or disregards the articles about confirmation bias because they... Yeah. But I mean, you could argue, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. Like, confirmation bias, just saying it's confirmation bias doesn't
help.
Mean he's wrong.
Because we're all doing it all the time because that's how our brains work.
Yeah, but it is a really interesting observation that he says this phrase, know the outcome and you'll see the journey, 7 times throughout the course of the thing. And he doesn't just say it, it's on the screen, it's written on the screen with like a picture of a road. It's like a long road.
How funny.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So point number 4, centralized power. So this is what he says. He says, the reptiloids, they're all controlling everything, but that's not good enough. They need to get it into one point of power so it's easier to control, because it's hard to control, like, oh, I'm controlling the, the rulers of the banks, and I'm controlling the rulers of Big Pharma, and I'm controlling the American president, and I'm controlling Australia.
It's a company. You need like a head of a company.
You need to bring them all together.
Sure.
And have one person, and then the reptiloids can control that one person. So what he's pointing to is the fact that power aggregates, which is true. Yeah. I mean, if you look at like the way states form, like you'll have like local rulers and then they'll start teaming up and they'll form districts or counties and then they'll start teaming up and eventually you have a country.
And it's like, it's a principle. It's like, is it like partly Pareto principle, like where
I don't know what that
20% of the people will control 80% of
interesting.
It's stuff like that. But I just feel like what he's stating is, it's not shocking. It's kind of, well, that is how
it's kind of naturally how things happen. power groups up. And I think it's fair enough to be a little bit troubled by that in some instances, especially if you don't like who's in charge. Yeah.
Okay, continue.
So he says, his example to prove this is he's like, the people involved in big pharma, by which he means pharmaceutical companies, but this scare phrase, big pharma, that it's just come into the normal lexicon, hasn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's implying something that isn't quite
scary
true.
And it's pharma.
Yeah. And so the people involved in big pharma and the people involved in regulating big pharma are the same people.
Oh, we're fucked then.
And it's interesting. There's a guy, Ben Goldacre, who's written quite a lot about
medicine.
Yeah, about medicine, about big pharma, but from a skeptical perspective. And he has lots of critiques of the way that trials are run and the way that all this works and the way it's regulated. So again, it is something that's reasonable to be troubled by these things. Yeah. But to imply that the two things are being controlled by reptiloid extraterrestrials might be taking it a step too far. So this is when I start, at this point when he's talking about centralizing power, I start to decide to start counting the audience responses, because I think this is the first time that we get a clap.
Yes.
I think it might be, he says...
It takes a while for us to warm up.
Yeah, it's like an hour in, we get the first big clap. And he says, the big pharma thing, the people who control big pharma, the people who control regulating big pharma are the same people, and they're repressing alternative medicine. And that's the first, not everyone, but a large percentage of the audience is like, yeah, good point, alternative medicine is the best. So I started doing my score. I can tell you my end of show tally, if you like. Well, I tallied up to the first break. I didn't tally the last...
So you were counting, but you're not counting the things, because by the end, I could predict when people would go a bit mad.
Yeah.
You could kind of sense it. It was brilliant.
So we got one clap for complaining about alternative medicine, and alternative medicine is great, and why are they suppressing it? We got one clap for an anti-immigration comment. Yeah. He was saying, they're bringing in all these immigrants, blah,
and
blah.
Taking our jobs. It was effectively
it was a very classic, thing that British people, kind of grumpy old British men say about immigrants coming and taking our jobs, but because the reptiloids want them to, because I can't entirely remember the logic. We got one laugh for mocking LGBT issues.
There was a lot of that. Every time when he started going down that path, there was a lot of mocking laughter and claps.
Yeah. And we got one laugh for one clap for saying free speech is really important. Hooray for free speech. And we got two big rounds of applause for anti-PC comments. Okay. So political correctness gone mad. Classic old dad thing you hear in a pub in the UK.
Mad.
And then the biggest claps, and the people really getting into it, were anti-transgender people comments, which is so surprising, because what has this got to do with transgender at all?
Man, he somehow made it tie in.
Yes, it's very, very strange. And then there are a couple which I couldn't really fit into any neat category. But that sort of gives you an idea of who the audience are and what they respond to.
Again, angry, scared people, just that would be the assumption. Okay, that would be my people who are going to be clapping and cheering about those things. It's fear driven.
It had a very it's like you could have just flipped through the Daily Mail for the last year.
Oh my God, yeah.
And found articles about all of these things.
Yeah.
So that's just to give you an idea of the demographic. My partner, who we were with that evening, said these all look like taxi drivers. That's the vibe I get off them.
I mean, don't mean to offend taxi drivers.
No, well, I think the thing about taxi drivers is they have a lot of time on their hands and they're intelligent. You have to be, especially back in the day when you had to memorize all the roads.
And we've all been in a taxi where you've had that conversation, which you don't know what to say. I've been biting my tongue. I'm like, I can't agree with you, sir, but I can't start disagreeing because I'm in your taxi.
So they're clever men, generally men, who have a lot of time in their hands, who are listening to stuff on their little radio, and they come up with ideas, and no one ever challenges them, because you don't challenge your taxi driver because he's driving you. So you just put up... I had a guy who picked me up from a train station once. Oh, it's such a weird conversation. Sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'll tell you anyway, because it's so strange. He was like, did you hear about the earthquakes in Canada? And I was like, no, what? And he's like, oh yeah, I just heard about them this morning. Terrible earthquakes in Canada. I'm like, where did you hear about these? Can we put the news on? Oh my God. He was saying, yeah, 50,000 people died. I was like, what the fuck? Because it's possible that, I don't know. Maybe it's not possible. I don't know if they have earthquakes in Canada. Probably don't. But anyway, I was tired. I just come off a long train journey, a little bit drunk, picked up a taxi, and he's telling me about these earthquakes. I was like, oh God, I want to find more. And he's like, yeah, you can find it's all over YouTube. They're going to start happening tomorrow. I was like, oh, so they haven't actually happened yet. And then he's like, yeah, well, the thing is, everyone thinks that 9/11 was an inside job by the American government. And, obviously it's a bit more complicated than that, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to frame the Muslim religion and the Islamic people so that they can make it look like they're the Antichrist, but actually the Americans have the Antichrist. And he was like, and it was this whole Islamic conspiracy theory but I couldn't stop him because I'd shown interest.
Yeah.
And been
Well, that's how it starts.
Yeah. And so just the whole taxi ride home, I was like, yeah.
That's it. And that's all. Yeah. It's kind of almost like fun. Like when you're in the taxi, I mean, this is how I've experienced it. It's all good and fun. I might even be like, yeah, and even come up with things to agree on because it's more fun to agree with something. It's
to play
easier,
along.
right?
It's like you're...
But when you leave it, it's like, oh God, that's somebody's life.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, I thought when I got out of the taxi, I thought maybe I should have been a bit more intimidated by this guy, but he seems super nice.
I don't know. No, I definitely don't think there's any reason to be intimidated. It's more like mild pity.
Oh,
really?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's a happy place to be in.
No.
When your world is being challenged by these outside threats. That's horrible.
Yeah. So the next, and this is sad as well. The next point 5, is hide the real goal. Yeah. So it's this idea that there's something going on underneath which they're hiding from us. And the real goal is, which he gets into at an
Brace yourself.
is to enslave humans via artificial intelligence.
Jesus.
Okay, that's all I've got written down for point 5. Clearly didn't engage me that much. Point number 6, I've just got a question mark because I missed that one.
Which is fine. But am I right in thinking at this point, does he mention the Archons wanting to live off our fear?
No.
Oh, does that not come
I'm going to
up?
ask you about that afterwards because that is not mentioned at all.
not.
We only, because when we left the thing, we were like,
memory syndrome.
What do the Archons want? What do the Archons want? Why are they doing all this? He never told us what they did. And my partner was like, they want to feed off our fear. And I was like, he didn't say that. He didn't say that because I knew because I was taking notes.
Yeah.
But Paul's read some David Icke before, so he knew this.
Okay, and I've now mixed that into my knowledge of that. So
I wonder whether that's too much for a 4-hour show. Maybe if we'd gone to a 12-hour show, because he does sometimes speak for 12 hours, and the woman sitting next to us said the last one she went to was 10 hours. So yeah, maybe when we only got a 4-hour thing, maybe he goes into more detail. And this is when I noticed that the articles, he's often quoting articles, and he'll have the article up on the projector, and I'm like, this name keeps coming up. Andrew Cheetham. Who's Andrew Cheetham? Why has he written all these articles?
Or Jamie Icke, who
his
son.
Yeah. And then I noticed all the articles are from his own website.
Yeah. He's constantly quoting his own blog. Like, it's a crazy thing to do.
It is a really crazy thing to do because some of them are things you probably could have found other sources for.
Yeah.
They're like, there's one where he's like, this is the next point 7, encourage addiction or technological dependency. And he quotes this study where 1 in 3 kids uses a phone before they can talk, which is based on a survey by the Pediatric Academy Society.
By the way, I think this might have gotten a clap, or like not a clap, but like a. But when I think about my nieces and nephews, sure, they have held their parents' phones to like watch a silly nursery rhyme or to press some things. It's no different from like there being a TV on in the background.
Exactly.
It's so funny.
But,
what a ridiculous stat.
So he quotes that and he shows an article from his website, but he could have actually shown the study because it's a real thing.
Yeah.
But I don't know why he's making these choices. If you flip through his book, you'll find the same thing. If you just flip through looking for footnotes and then just go to the footnotes, they're on his own website. It's weird. Really weird. So that's point number 7, encourage addiction, technological dependency. And he's basically saying what the Archons want to do, although he never calls them the Archons in this. We're using that language because we now know, because we've got the download.
He might have mentioned them in a very early slide.
Oh, maybe.
Very briefly.
Do you think he uses the word Archons?
He did.
Okay.
Because I hadn't heard of the word before.
I feel like he keeps saying Illuminati and just they, keeping it
No,
nebulous.
when he's talking about like the jinn and all of the different spirits. And anyway, continue.
Anyway, so the idea is to get us more and more involved in computers.
Yes. Because
we're easier to control if we're in computers?
I guess so. It's almost like factory farming. It's like, I see it as, instead of having us all free range, fuck it, let's just put us all in factory farms.
Isn't it interesting that the most horrible thing we can think of that would happen to us as human beings is exactly what we do to animals?
All right, vegan.
Anyway, yeah. So there's all sorts of stuff around technological dependency. We're using too much computers, we're getting sucked into the computers, we're getting sucked into the matrix, and they're using preemptive programming by movies. Preemptive programming, he's got all these little phrases. Yeah. Preemptive programming is quite a nice one, where they're showing us like movies where we're interacting with robots.
Yes.
And
to
it's
kind of
normal.
get us used to
it's
it.
normalizing it. And this is a point where a really good audience response is, he was talking about, so there's this report, this is actually what happened. There was a report by Thames Valley Police saying, they're like, what's going to happen in the next 10 years of law enforcement? And they say, basically, it was only sensible to expect that we're going to be using AI to answer emergency calls, detect crime, and ID offenders. These are sort of things we're looking into, what we can do with AI. And he uses this to write an article on his blog, which he then puts up and cites, "Robocops are coming to London." And a woman screamed at that point. She was like two rows ahead of us on the right-hand side. She's like, like a full-on,
It's
like,
true.
yeah, because that's scary.
See, that's the level of fear he's instilling. I'm sorry, but there is a lot of like fear mongering.
You don't have to apologise for implying that David Icke might not be the most.
All of the Icke fans, but microchips, smart devices. This is a big thing, and like this is interesting because it's not like it's not like we don't have evidence for this stuff.
Yeah.
You can find it. I'm not sure about the smart dust as much, but like definitely microchips.
Wait a minute, explain smart dust for the listeners who are
so
concerned
what
and
I love about this,
scared of smart
because
dust.
it really did like trigger something in me that said, maybe he's got a point with this. Okay, so we've all had the experience of talking about something to a friend. Hey, I really want a new yoga mat. And then seeing an ad for that yoga mat appear on our phone, and we're like, we didn't even search for that. They heard me. Yes. So apps like WhatsApp are listening to us. We know that.
Are they?
Yes, but they actually are.
Are they?
Okay.
Though?
Yes, it's known. It's actually known. Sorry, but like that's a thing. So
when you say listening,
yes, listening to us.
as in they turn the microphone off your phone on.
This is why I don't have Facebook Messenger on, because
they're not just recording the
your
text.
fucking microphone.
They're using the microphone of your phone, turning it on and listening.
Yes,
I don't think
time.
that's true.
Okay. Interesting.
The reason I don't think it's true is because I've heard people who are like phone geeks talk about it and about how if you're a phone geek, you know how to look for those sort of things, and you'd be able to see records of like if your microphone was being turned on.
Hiding it.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of these conspiracy theories, because whatever I say to debunk it, the conspiracy theory could say, well, they're just very good at hiding it.
It's amazing, and like you can make anything real.
I just think there's a more plausible explanation for that yoga mat example, for example. Like, so you're a woman, you're in your 30s, you're interested in yoga, you're Googling for astrology, you're Googling for all sorts of things, right? They aggregate the data of what people who are like you
to, which is really
and then they
hard for us to
advertise a yoga
imagine,
mat.
because it's hard for us to imagine that they could know us so well just from our behaviors and demographics.
And that is a bit creepy, to be fair.
Anyway, so the next like logical conclusion where the smart dust comes in is it's not just that it's listening to you from your microphone. It's like there are these microchip particles that go into your brain and are like reading your mind and feeding back information.
And I think he implied that they were being released by planes.
Yes.
That's what chemtrails are.
Yeah, obviously.
So chemtrails are this idea. Sorry, this is the problem with David Icke. He brings in so many different ideas, so we have to keep going on tangents to explain everything. Chemtrails is, so like planes go across the sky and they condense air as they move. And I don't know all the details of this, but there's some great resources. In fact, I'll put them in the show notes if you want to learn more about chemtrails. So what they actually are condensed water vapor. They're contrails, which is why it's such a clever little pun that the conspiracy theorists have done calling them chemtrails. They say, no, they're not condensed air. What they are is evil chemicals.
Yep.
And the brilliant thing about this conspiracy theory is every pilot would have to be in on it, or everyone who loads up the plane. There would have to be so many people in on it to make this happen.
Well, unless they don't know what they're putting in. I could easily just defend this argument about the chemtrails, which is so crazy because I'm just making stuff up and I've never read about chemtrails, but I could still make up an argument why it's true.
Yeah.
And it's the same with this. So the idea that when you next think of a yoga mat and never even say the words, it will advertise a yoga mat to you.
And that's because smart dust released from aeroplanes has floated down, gone into your ear or something,
snorted it,
burrowed into your brain, and is recording everything and reporting it back to the Archons, who then get in touch with Facebook and say, give her advert for yoga mat, that's what she likes.
Which is like a fucking terrifying idea.
Yeah, but it's so baroque, considering the simpleness of the explanation is actually you just fall into a demographic of people who like yoga mats.
And you're actually more predictable than you'd like to think.
Incredibly
And that's
predictable.
scary in itself. Both are scary ideas.
It's true. So that the smart dust brings us on to point number 8, genetic rewire. Nice. So basically, he's saying that the Archons are trying to almost make us half robots, so we're easier to control. And the way that they're doing this primarily is through 5G. which is the new cell phone.
People are so scared of this stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. He said that 5G mentally, physically, and emotionally, it's lethal.
Yeah.
And it distorts our electromagnetic field, it distorts our DNA, and it unravels our DNA.
Wait, I can't even imagine that as a thing.
I never heard of such a thing. I've heard of EMF. People are concerned about EMF.
Sure.
Which is electromagnetic.
And actually really intelligent people are concerned about that.
Well, it's one of those things. EMF is a really interesting thing. It's a bit like, there's some other examples, like Morgellons. Have you heard of that? Anyway, it's basically people who have symptoms that are really vague, and doctors keep saying, oh, we don't know what it is. Oh, just shut up, basically. We don't have time to deal with your problems. Because, especially in the UK, the NHS is very stretched. And someone who just comes in every week going, oh, I feel a bit like I've got a headache and I feel a bit tired. The doctors don't have time to deal with that. Which maybe is a flaw of our healthcare system, but that's the reality for a lot of people. They're feeling a bit under the weather all the time.
Chronically,
and no one can help them. And so they start looking around for answers because it's frightening to not know what's wrong with you. And they come across these articles about EMF and how, your Wi-Fi might be burrowing into your cells and making you feel sick. And there's a whole community of people at last I found the answer. All I have to do is move away from society and live on my own and only have wired internet and all this stuff. And on our way, so the 5G thing is just an extension of that. It's the next level. Now don't worry about just general electromagnetic frequency. Worry about the specific 5G thing.
And I remember there was a photo of I think because it is installed in some places, but they have to do it really close to homes.
Yeah.
So it's and they will be placing them outside your baby's window. Yes. A really extreme idea. Oh God, not my baby.
He said that's what he said. It's going to be right outside your baby's window.
I think statements like that are cruel, personally.
Yeah. I think it's stuff that we don't understand. I don't understand how 5G works.
No.
And therefore it's a bit it's a bit intimidating.
And
it's a bit
what
scary.
I will say is that they don't seem to be, no one's proved that it's safe, right? But there are a lot of things that they haven't They haven't.
Sorry, that was an eye roll. I just didn't get to see it.
You could hear it in my voice. One thing that I've seen a lot of, and I think I've mentioned it to you, but you haven't maybe seen it, but there's particular parts of Brighton and Hove where people have written, no 5G.
Really?
Just
no,
rambling
I haven't seen that.
Chalk signs on the pavement.
Oh, that's
lot
interesting.
Of them.
In summertime, I saw a lot of chemtrail chalk graffiti saying chemtrails are not chemtrails. Yeah. Look it up with a link to some conspiracy theorist website. I wonder if it's the same guy.
Scared people.
But so I was like, this is really odd. This whole, I don't know why this 5G. What is this 5G thing about? I've never heard anyone complaining about this before. And then on the way home, we stop at a services halfway between home and Margate, and on the back of the toilet door is a poster saying, what did it say? Something like, how safe is your phone?
Yeah.
And then it has a picture, and it says, it basically said that radiation from phones, 5G, Wi-Fi, smart meters causes cancer.
Right.
That
big claim.
It's a very
in
big
a
claim.
public place.
It might be an illegal claim.
Did you look this?
I took a photo because I was like, I should probably go to talk to I should probably go down to the offices of the Advertising Standards Bureau and have a word with them, which I haven't got around to yet, but I could send a quick email saying, what the fuck, why are you putting these posters? They're scary and untrue. Yeah. So the person who makes those posters is Electromagnetic Man, and I had a quick look at his website, and he's one of these people.
He's trying to make money from protecting people.
Yeah. I don't know. I became a bit fond of him because he has his story on his website, Electromagnetic Man, and he basically says, I had tummy aches and I had headaches and I was feeling dizzy and I was really sad and my life was super stressful and I couldn't work out why, and it was all such a bummer. And then I found out about electrosensitivity and it all made sense, and I moved out to the country and I got rid of my Wi-Fi, and now I feel much better.
Which most people do when they move out to the country from a city.
I just recently moved out to the country. I feel much better. I'm pretty sure it's not to do with the Wi-Fi.
Oh my God, it's proof.
He has on his website, you'll love this because you love these sort of tests, an ES test.
Love it.
So you can find out how
electrically I am.
You are. So I did it. I'll tell you my score in a minute. But the questions are things like, do you suffer from headaches, tenseness, sleep disturbances or insomnia, bouts of unusual irritability, rage, violence, destructiveness, feeling hostile? And
raise your hand if you've never felt those things.
Exactly. You have to rate them either frequently, occasionally, or never.
Okay.
Who's going to say never for any of those things?
Right.
We all have bouts of uncontrollable rage once or twice a day.
You said what? Yeah.
So I scored 17. which means I may be one of the 35% of people suffering from some degree of electro-stress.
Okay.
If I score more than 25, I may have delivered electrosensitivity. So I'm okay. I haven't got electrosensitivity. And his advice to me this is probably the same advice David Icke would give you, although as we'll go into, he doesn't really give any advice. Electromagnetic Man had some advice. He said, use a fixed wire phone. Cordless phones and mobile phones should be switched off when not in use. Well, you wouldn't be using them because you'd be using a fixed wire phone. He says, do not use Wi-Fi. Opt for a fixed wire computer and LAN plugs, which transmit broadband around the main system of your home, giving safe, secure, and fast access whenever there is a main socket.
I mean, those aren't massive changes you'd have to make to your home. It wouldn't be that inconvenient, right?
No, it wouldn't. But I'm only suffering from electro stress.
Yeah.
If I was the next level up, then he'd probably say, put on a tinfoil hat, move to the country. Don't ever look at anyone in the eye.
So one thing I do is I turn my phone on airplane mode at night because I think it might be frying my brain otherwise.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a bit bonkers.
But it's easy to do, right? It's like, it's not affecting my life if I just turn my phone on airplane mode at night.
Yeah, I guess so. But do you really think it's frying your brain? If you think it's frying your brain, why do you have it on during the day?
This is definitely Pascal's wager. I would rather just be safe.
But then why have it on during the day? If
it's not near my head. I don't sleep with it near my head. I sleep with it near my head. So 8 hours a day with those fucking 5G things.
I don't know. I think the problem is that I can't tell you not to worry and be convincing because I don't know it enough.
There's no point in telling me not to do that thing because this is the thing which we will hopefully talk about. The impact of that, turning my phone on airplane mode at night, is so small. Why not do it? It's just tiny.
I get what you're saying, but it just I don't think it's cool to just have that fear lingering when it's an unscientific fear. Because if you actually chatted to someone who knew anything about electromagnetic fields, then they'd be able to say,
okay, I just have to find one of those people, and
well,
when I do,
there. All you have to do is look for them. Like, go find them on the internet. In fact, there was a guy at a skeptics conference I went to who did a whole talk on it.
Wow.
But obviously, I wasn't paying enough attention because I can't explain it to you now. But basically, there's really nothing to worry about.
But what I will say is, when I'm putting my belief into this person, which I could easily put into that person or into David Icke, you know, they're both people. They're both flawed people. Or I could just hedge my bets by pressing a button on my phone.
But then why not hedge your bets and wear a tinfoil hat? Some people say you should do that.
That seems a lot more... Clearly, that's different
just
than
do it
pressing
at
a
night.
button. No, because
you could have the tinfoil hat right by your bed.
I have to make the whole tinfoil hat. It would take ages.
It wouldn't take ages.
No, this is crazy.
I'll make you one right now.
Are you defending the fact that you've wearing tinfoil hat?
Anyway... The point is there's a lot of fear about technology and how it interferes with our lives. And weirdly, this is where he starts bringing up the transgender stuff.
Yes.
Which really came out of the blue for me because I was like, how could this possibly relate to anything? Like, I see why, because it's very popular among a certain segment of society to piss on trans people. But I don't see how he can relate it to this overall thing. But he cleverly manages to make it work.
Somehow.
So what he says is that transgenderism is a plot to induce gender bewilderment because robots don't have gender or sex, and so they want to get us used to the idea of gender and sex not being real.
Do you want to deliver the pun that he...
No, you go for it.
So there was a meme that was put up that said something like, we don't have to worry about non-binary because what they want is for us to be all binary.
Oh, yeah, that was so good.
I laughed for about 10 minutes.
But no one else was laughing.
No,
but it was a joke, right? He meant it to be a joke.
It's a joke, but it's a joke in a way that he's also trying to make a point.
Yeah. I thought that was hilarious. Yeah, don't worry about non-binary sexualities. Yeah. Worry about the archons trying to make us all binary.
All binary.
But the weird thing was, the examples he was using of robots were all sex robots, which are highly gendered. They have exaggerated sexual features. Yeah. So I don't know. Then this is one of the things that makes me wonder about him because I'm like, I can understand how you think is like if you were trying to make a business, it's good to be mean to trans people because there's lots of people who hate trans people and you can get more money, which is a horrible thing to think, but true. But like, how can I don't understand how he can logically justify thinking that transgenderism is part of a plan by the reptiloids. It just doesn't seem to fit.
Part of me wonders, this is somebody who's, is it a xenophobe where you're just scared of like other people, like the outside, the different? I don't know, but basically that's what it seems to be. It's like somebody who's scared of like the other, and let's just say the archetypal other, and is using his complex theories to explain why that's right.
Yeah.
Because he could be a transphobe, like anti-Jew person who's trying to make these elaborate theories to fit that. And he could be fooling himself.
Yeah, it's true.
Anyway.
It was very strange, and it was very uncomfortable suddenly to realise that so many people in the audience didn't like trans people and thought mocking them was cool.
Yeah.
Like, and I was like,
oh, man,
whoa, I thought you guys
crazy.
were just a bit nuts, but it turns out you're mean.
Yeah.
That was a moment where I felt like my relationship with the audience shifted.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I thought I was just in with a bunch of harmless nutters.
Yeah.
And this is not all of them. Not all of them clapped. One of the interesting things about the audience responses is how scattered it was.
Not, yeah. The woman next to me was, I think she clapped maybe once in the whole thing. And you wonder if you were influencing them by not clapping, because I just couldn't bring myself to clap at any point. But then there were certain groups of people which were like almost like hooping at stuff, especially towards the end.
Yeah. That was very, very strange. And that's the moment where I stopped feeling guilty, because I felt the same. Like, I was sitting next to a couple who were really getting into it, obviously. And I was like sitting there taking notes. And I thought, oh no, they think that I'm like judging them and I'm ruining their night. And then when they're clapping at the anti-trans stuff, I was just like, yeah, well, fuck you if I'm ruining your night. I don't care. You guys are dicks.
Yeah.
So, point 9, control the information. And this is when he starts talking about all the free speech stuff. And this is so interesting because there are so many parallels. If you guys listen to our Jordan Peterson episode, like, Jordan Peterson obviously does not think there are reptiloids ruling the world, but there are many, many similarities between what he says about free speech and how they are controlling our free speech, and they're trying to repress us and they're trying to confuse us, and postmodern neo-Marxism, all that stuff is very similar to David Icke's conspiracy theory. I think we said in the Jordan Peterson episode, wait a minute, this sounds a bit like conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And seeing David Icke just made me feel even more so, he's part of that camp.
The way they construct their arguments, it's like what Jordan Peterson also does. I would love to make a table of comparison between the two, because he's also referring back to these like old myths, these old texts, these olden times when things were good and right, and trying to hark back to this older age. And then also maybe you could criticize him and David for being either transphobic or like whatever, like anti stuff that we should be a little bit more tolerant around. And then using his theories to fit that.
And it's not just the theories that are similar, but it's like you say, it's the way he constructs them. There's this thing called the Gish Gallop, which is where you just say loads of information really fast and you don't let anyone get a chance for a word in edgewise, and you just keep on piling on and piling on and piling on. It's named after some American Christian apologist. I guess Reverend Gish or something. I don't know. Anyway, and that's exactly what Jordan Peterson done. It's exactly what David Icke does. They just say stuff and they make up their own phrases, like Jordan Peterson's postmodern neo-Marxism. What the fuck does that mean? He doesn't explain it. He carries on. And David Icke is the same with all the totalitarian tiptoe or whatever, all these like little phrases and things that if you're on the ins, then you know them and you know what's going on.
You think you know.
Yeah. And you can it just glides over you and you stop. And this is point 9. So this is the last point. And at this point, my critical thinking had just turned off because it's tiring to try and analyze every single thing and write it down. And I think the experience of me sitting there trying to take notes so I could tell the listeners what our experience was so different to everyone else's, because I was actually like, writing down, okay, point 1, he said this. Then point 2, he went on to say this. And point 3, and I was looking back at my notes, I was like, these don't connect in any, how did he make these connect?
I remember it at the time, because when he would like put his, he'd wrap up a point, I wasn't sure if the title of the point was referring to what he just said or what he was going to say.
I know. I feel like
bizarre.
I've been working hard to explain them to you, to link the title of the point back to what he said. Because what was the one where he brought up transgenderism? Oh, yeah. Genetic rewire. That's when he started talking about transgenderism. I'm like, transgenderism? Genetic rewire?
Where does that all fit?
What? So, yeah, the last point is free speech. And it's basically about how the archons, via the government and whoever else, are trying to control our free speech, limit what we say, basically so we won't speak out against the archons.
Yeah.
We won't do what he's doing. And he brings up, as an example, 9/11 truth thread on Reddit that had been quarantined.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That you couldn't find online anymore.
No, it was actually genuinely quarantined. And I think...
But now you can't find it.
He might have had the... quarantine is really... I never heard of this. I go on Reddit occasionally. I don't really post on it, but I go, if I need to find out something, it's a really good resource, especially if you're looking up one of the sort of subjects that we cover on the show. So I looked into what quarantine threads were. And basically what Reddit do is they don't want people just coming in and reading 9/11 truth shit and thinking it's true. Okay. But they don't want to stop people saying it because that's a bit like infringing their free speech thing. Yeah. So they've got this compromise where before you go into the thread, a screen will come up. And this is what he showed us on his PowerPoint display, saying that this Reddit has been quarantined, it might have information that's untrue.
Yeah.
It might have stuff that's offensive. Don't use this as a resource. Yeah. It's like a warning, basically.
Yeah,
it's like
these
a
are
warning.
just opinions. These aren't
this
what
might
we call facts.
This might be bullshit, basically, is the warning, or this might be troubling, or this might be whatever. And I actually think that's quite a sensible decision. It's quite a good compromise for Reddit, because if I was Reddit, I wouldn't want to have 9/11 truth stuff.
Yeah.
But also I can kind of see their point that people, I don't know, that people should be allowed to say things.
Because I think that's worse. I think the point of the internet isn't just to... I guess it is a filter, but you don't... It's a filtering system. But you don't want to have those filters imposed. Anyway.
So... There's a list of quarantined subreddits that I found. And just to give you a flavour of the sort of subreddits that are quarantined, we've got r/killingwomen, r/truelolly, and many other Lolita-themed forums, which is super creepy. r/Jesus chatline. I didn't look that one. I don't know what that one is. r/mature armpits. I was intrigued by this, so I went to have a look. It's porn, and a lot of these are porn, but it's specifically porn for men who like to look at naked women who are mature showing their armpits.
Whoa,
it's actually quite sweet. They're often wearing pants, so it's like just topless and with their arms up in the air, and it's like you see a bit of boob and a close up of the armpit. Aww. There was one where it's like a woman who looked, I don't know, like in her late 40s, and then a woman who was like 18, pillow fighting on a bed, topless but with pants on, and both their arms are up in the air as they're pillow hitting each other, so you can see in their armpits, because it's porn.
Oh, so all the porn stuff is
so there's loads and loads of them. r/Islamic State was one of the lists. It's now banned. This was an old list that I found, because I clicked through, I was like, what, really? And that has actually been banned now. And r/Cutter's Gone Wild, which I didn't click on because it sounded horrible.
I want to know what the Jesus chatline is.
Well, go find out.
Would that be Jesus porn?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
So basically the themes are, there's a lot of misogyny, there's a lot of racism, there's a lot of porn, a lot of sexualized imagery of children. Yeah. I don't think they go on to have full, like, actual child porn, but it's just like, I don't know, because I didn't click on this, so this is just my imagination of what is in our True Lolly and all the other Lolita themed things. But what I imagine is it's like fiction, like people writing, and then I fucked a child and it was great, but probably more disgustingly and floridly. If that's not disgusting enough for you listeners. So that's what Reddit quarantining, which seems quite a sensible choice, I think.
Yes.
But not according to David Icke. To David Icke, that is actually the reptiloids stopping us from having access to things that we need to have access to so we can get to the truth. Except they're not stopping it. They're just putting in a little warning saying, before you look at mature armpits, just let you know there might be some mature armpits coming.
There is, like, you do have to wonder, like, what is the harm in what these people are saying? What's the harm in what David Icke is saying? Why would you quarantine this stuff? The 9/11 stuff?
Yeah. I think, it's interesting, like the whole conspiracy theory, what's the harm question, I guess we'll come to towards the end of the podcast when we're summing up. But it is difficult to see in a straightforward way how this is harmful. But the things we've talked about, the sort of racism, not necessarily him being racist, but there's a sort of racist vibe, the anti-trans stuff, like they're also, not...
It's different to be anti that stuff. Like, when you are discriminating against a group of people, that is harmful and that should be quarantined or banned. However, when it's just it being suspicious about your government, I don't know. I think we're allowed to be fucking suspicious. Suspicious about the government.
Yeah, I agree. I just think that a lot of this is a weird network of concerns, some of which are kind of legitimate and some are ridiculous and some are just bigoted. And it's really hard to disentangle all those threads. For
sure. And it's a sliding scale. And like once, like he was saying, freedom of speech shouldn't mean like freedom of hate speech.
Yeah.
That's basically what I think most people's conclusion is. But when you follow his, it's like, no, all speech should be free. And therefore, what does that mean? People can just say bad stuff.
Yeah, it's difficult. I don't really know where I stand on the whole free speech thing.
It is a difficult issue.
But it's a hot button topic, like many of the topics he's brought up.
Yeah.
And it's clearly a concern of the right.
Yep.
I mean, in America at least, these are sort of not necessarily the right, but the people who sort of think of themselves as the new center.
Yeah.
Those guys, they're very, Jordan Peterson, people like that are very concerned with free speech. It's one of their bandwagon issues. And I think there's a lot of kind of fuzziness about how they define free speech, and it's all a bit vague, but the general vibe is we're the good guys. Everyone needs to be able to say the truth and they're trying to repress us, and that's bad and wrong. And I think they have a point to some extent, but the way it's sort of played is really dubious. And then David Icke is just like, yeah, me too. I'm into free speech too.
Yeah.
And to be fair, I think he is more into free speech than any of the other free speech warriors out there, because what he's saying is legit crazy.
Yeah.
And he has been saying it for a long time, despite people being mean to him about it. So anyone who has like the right to don the free speech warrior crown, it's David Icke.
He's been able to have a lot of free speech.
Yeah.
For like 20 years.
Yeah, and what's happened to him? People have mocked him. That's basically what's happened to him. It's not like the government hasn't tried to shut him down that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So that, anyway, that's the point he ends on, as saying, we have to speak the truth. He comes back to what he started with, really. Truth to power is really important. And then he says, okay, so I've told you the problem. I've given you my 9 points. This is 3 hours in. It took 3 hours to tell you what I've just told you with a bit more detail and amazing PowerPoints. Now, after the break, I'm going to tell you what we can do about it. And then everyone just goes mental, clapping and screaming like, yeah, David Icke, oh, we can't wait to hear that. And that's the point where we're like, oh, do you think we could go?
Like, at this point, I really was hoping we could just call it a day.
I was too, but then I thought of our listeners.
To see it through to the end. Yeah.
I thought of you out there who need to know what the solution is, because it's like, he's promising so much. He's told us how terrible the world is and why, because these reptiloids are controlling through their 9-point plan. Mm-hmm. And now he's going to tell us a solution after only a 10-minute break.
Yeah.
Which wasn't enough time to get up to the bar and get anything.
It's ridiculous.
Yeah. That was very poorly planned. And there was another bar. This is, again, a side note that is irrelevant. But if you ever go to the Winter Gardens in Margate to see anyone, know that there is another bar. There's like a bar around the back. You can just pop in there and get a drink immediately, but no one knows it's there and the staff don't tell you. So everyone's just queuing up. And in 10 minutes, that's not time. I don't know. Why is that break so short?
Yeah, that was strangely short.
Maybe they closed the venue at like a certain time. And he has to get his message
his final
into a
hour
smaller,
out, which is very important.
So the solution. Okay, this is going to disappoint you. It disappointed us. So he actually mentioned this at the beginning, that there's this, he calls it the religion of I am a.
Oh, yeah.
I am a Christian. I am a woman.
Yeah.
I am a whatever, like these identity labels that we give ourselves. And he says it in a funny way. He says everything in a funny way. It's much more compelling when he says it. The religion of I am a. We cleave to these identity labels and they trap us. And we need to, the secret is, that's all the Archon's doing.
Yeah.
They give us these identities. They force us to stick in these identities where they can control us. And what we need to do is drop them and just be infinite love.
Ta-da!
There you go, be infinite love. Problem solved.
The answer is love, which I guess people have been saying for quite some time.
Yeah. So he quotes, he puts a quote up on the screen, which it says, everything is energy, and that's all there is to it. Match the frequency of the reality you want, and you cannot help but get that reality. It can be no other way. This is not philosophy. This is physics.
This is lovely. This is the law of attraction stuff.
And then underneath it says, Einstein. And you're like, wow, Einstein
classic.
said that?
Einstein gets banded around quite a lot.
Well, that's what you said. You said, oh, this seems like a quote taken out of context. So I was like, oh, I'm going to check and find out what the context was. It's actually not an Einstein quote at all.
No, but it's crazy when you realise how much misquoted stuff is going on.
Do you want to guess who quoted it?
No.
Who the original came up with? It's a channeler, but not one of our favourites. It's not Sven from our previous episode on channeling angels and aliens, and it's not your favourite. What's her name?
Esther Hicks.
Esther Hicks. It's not Esther Hicks. It's a guy called Daryl Anker, who is channeling the entity Bashar.
Oh yeah, Bashar. I've heard of him. Okay, yeah, I've heard good things.
So that's who that quote originally came from, and then at some point someone misattributed to Einstein. I'm sure David Icke didn't do this on purpose. He probably just saw this quote in some woo book and then copied it down. So, but it's just really funny and ironic that this is being attributed to like one of the most like famous, well-known, respected scientists, and actually from some guy who was channeling an entity, probably in a little weird room, just like the channeler we went to see.
And like the thing is, these sayings, like there was nothing that I would have necessarily disagreed with. Maybe I'd see a lot of what he's saying as a metaphor and not actually real, but that overall message of just acting with love is like, what a great message.
Yeah.
Because the scariest thing would be if he spent that last hour saying, you know, you have to wear tinfoil hats and stop paying your taxes, and like just crazy unhelpful advice.
Yeah.
The happiest medium, I think, would have been something like something a little bit more practical. So how do you like live with infinite love? How do you tap into that? And I would say like something that Esther Hicks might say is meditate.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that's like pretty sound advice.
Yeah, I think maybe you could even mention the Metta Bhavana, which is the Buddhist meditation of loving kindness. So metta means love, where you focus on loving yourself, then you focus on loving your friend, and then you focus on loving a stranger.
The barista, the coffee barista.
Yeah, that's always the example they use, isn't it? Like a person you don't know who's around, and then you focus on loving an enemy. Yeah. That's really hard. And then you focus on loving the whole of humanity and all sentient life.
And he could have guided us through that, and that would have been like a practical thing.
Yeah, that would be a top tip I'd give to David Icke.
We're going to write to him with our list of recommendations to improve his.
But do you think the angry neo-Nazis in the back would have liked that?
No, okay, so I think that they are not bad people, right? I don't think that just because they...
Just because they're neo-Nazis.
No, but just because they hate on some people, which I disagree with, doesn't mean that they don't also have a capability of love.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of interesting thing that I'm kind of taking away from what David Icke is appealing to. Like that guy on the train, he was not like some angry, crazy man. He was a little bit crazy, but he was very loving. And when we did start talking about like psychedelics and the loving experiences you can get from them, he lit up. Because it's real.
I'm kind of half joking about the neo-Nazis. We'll talk about it later, but I don't actually think there were neo-Nazis in the audience.
No. But there have probably been in David Icke's audiences in general.
Yes.
I think we've got some evidence.
Also, even if they didn't like the meditation stuff, you could have a practical way to bring more love into the world. It's like to do a kind act for someone every day. Very simple. Nice. Like you can either do the meditation, that's if you like meditation, or maybe you can just help old ladies across the street.
Yeah. Or like gratitude practice. That's like a really good one. Like
so he could have given us practical advice that wouldn't have been intimidatingly hard to do.
Yeah.
But he didn't give us any advice. He just gave us this sort of weirdness, and he told us the human mind is more powerful than matter. Like, and this is that the whole mind over matter thing. He brought up the placebo effect, which is so frustrating to me. I think that was the time I rolled my eyes and sighed because
I remember hearing you. I think I heard you like from 2 seats away.
Audible sigh. Like the placebo effect is like something that is massively misunderstood by people, and not because people are dumb, just because the media reports on it in this ridiculous way as if it's magic. It's not magic. The placebo improves how people report their subjective experience. That's what it does. Yeah. It doesn't have any measurable effects on health outcomes.
It doesn't mean that we're thinking ourselves well.
Yeah. It just means that if you ask someone after they've taken a placebo pill, do they feel better? They will say yes. That doesn't mean that they necessarily feel better. It doesn't mean that they're getting better. It just means that they're telling you they feel better. And
it doesn't mean that by taking the pill, again, they think they're getting better, and that's why they get better. It's that leap.
That's exactly what if you read any article in like the mainstream media, the lamestream media, as David Icke would call it, it will tell you that or it will strongly imply that because you think you're getting better, you are actually getting better, and that's what placebo does. That's just not true. And it's very, very frustrating, especially as a skeptic, because people say, what's wrong with homeopathy? It's a placebo, and everyone knows placebos work. I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's a misconception of the placebo. I mean, so I'll put a thing. This is, again, it's a random tangent, which we probably shouldn't get into now, but I'll put a link in the show notes, some sensible articles about placebo that explain what I'm saying. Because I think a lot of people, you've never heard this side presented. Yeah. Everyone just hears the mind over matter stuff.
And it's easier to forget that side because you've told me that a few times, and I'm still like, hang on, what's the argument? What's the sensible way of seeing it again? Like, it's much easier to be like, oh yeah, the placebo effect equals mind over matter.
And if you talk to scientists, they'll say, well, obviously that's nonsense. Why do I even need to explain that to the public? Like, why would they think and the reason why you need to explain it to the public is you have people like David Icke referring to it to support his mad theories. And firewalking is the other thing he brings up as an example of mind over matter, which is another thing which has a really boring scientific explanation. We should do an episode where we go firewalking.
I've heard about people burning their feet on that.
Yeah.
You know, like it's not like happen. I would even jump at that because you have to make sure that it is not, it's done really professionally.
Yes.
I've heard that I'm mentioning Tony Robbins for the second time in this episode, but that he's like, they've had to ban people using their phones because they're trying to take like fucking selfies on the firewalk and they're burning their feet.
If you stop walking, because that's how it works, you need to keep moving quite quickly so that your feet don't come into contact for any length of time with the hot coals.
The coals can't be too hot. Like,
they have to be just the right temperature.
Yeah.
So it's not mind over matter.
It's actually physics.
It's physics. Yeah. Which is a bit disappointing, I guess. But anyway, maybe we shouldn't do that as an episode since we don't want to burn our feet. But I'm sure if we were sensible. Anyway, we'll think about that. Let's talk about it after the podcast. So, and he says, and that's the other mind over matter thing he brings up. He says his football career ended because he had this horrible, crippling rheumatoid arthritis, which is terrible. He was like in his 20s and his career was gone because, and this actually probably plays in a lot to his personality, which we're going to talk about in a minute. But and he said, the way I've conquered my rheumatoid arthritis is simply by saying, I'm not having it.
And look at me now.
Yeah.
I'm walking around and I'm feeling better than ever.
Yeah.
And like the conclusion I guess we were meant to draw was, oh, it's because he's seen the light and his mind has healed him. What?
Yeah.
Like, he didn't even say anything like, oh, and I took this and I've been doing this and I've been, looking after myself a bit more and not playing football and I've gotten better.
That'll do it, yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah. But, and also, I mean, kind of, again, it's that thing is like, if you believe that you can cure yourself by just thinking happy thoughts, is that going to make you less likely to go to the doctor?
Well,
or
get really depressed when it's not working, because that's the other danger in a lot of this law of attraction stuff. When it's not working, you've been doing it for a while, you can hit the ground really hard.
And also developing a very cynical, mean attitude towards people who are suffering.
Sure,
because if you're
they just thought bad things.
Yeah, it's their fault. They could cure it easily if they just bothered to make their collage. What are they called?
Mood board, a vision board or something.
Vision board, that's the word. So he says once you stop conforming, and stop wearing the label, stop subscribing to the religion of I Am, stop complying to their wishes, I don't know what that means, he never elaborates, then you'll start experiencing synchronicities that let you know you're on the right track. And that's how you know you're waking up. You start seeing synchronicities. Yeah. Which is really interesting because this is like, we talked a lot about confirmation bias, but it's also like the schizotypal personality where you start seeing meaning in things and drawing connections.
And it's so funny because when we talk about his own story, and something that I've kind of been hearing more about recently is, you could say waking up, but you could also say actually going mad. Things do start lining up, but just before people have an actual breakdown. Yeah. Which is really sad.
Yeah. And just that thing, I mean, there's something, it's very human to like see a magpie and think, oh, that's a beautiful bird and it's just turned up at just the right point. Maybe it has a meaning for me. Yeah. And it's a lovely little game we play on our heads.
It is a game. It's a lovely game.
But if you start taking it too seriously, and also there is a certain arrogance to that game because you're like, that bird isn't just a bird having its own life, doing its own thing, migrating. Actually, I don't think magpies migrate, but whatever it's up to, going to build its nest, it's actually all about me.
Right. And well, there are a couple of things going on. So then I'm wondering, the more you start doing that and the more you do start noticing things like, oh, it's 11:22 at 1122, the more will that drive you crazy in itself? Yeah. The more you start thinking the world is conspiring, whether it's for or against you, could that not make you a bit mad?
Yeah. It's almost like you're feeding a delusion. Anyway, and that's what he sort of ends up with. He says more and more people are waking up, and then someone at the back shouts, all thanks to you, David.
Cute.
Which is so cute. But then he got a bit like blushy and he's like, oh, well, I don't know. Thank you.
Which is lovely and like humble. He wasn't like,
He wasn't like, yes, thanks to me. And so he says, basically, he ends on, they have no power unless you give it to them. If they're trying to tear us apart, isn't it time that we come together? And then that's the ending. And it's like, oh.
It was a good ending.
It was.
And then you can walk out, and I think people walked out in a good mood that night.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. People, they were exuberant.
Yes.
But the weird thing is when you actually start thinking about it, like you said, the first 3 hours is all fear, 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 the reptiloid's coming. And the last hour is vague platitudes about infinite love.
Yes.
So if you come out feeling all uplifted because he's an amazing speaker and you've been in this group of people who are all like cheering and stuff, and you come out feeling all good, and then you get home and you're like sitting there trying to write up your notes. Yeah. I'm not sure everyone was doing this, lying in bed after your David Icke talk, thinking about it a bit, and you're like, actually, wait a minute, there's nothing here. There's no substance. But that's what I felt after I left. I felt like I listened to him talk for 4 hours, and I still wasn't exactly sure who he was or what his theory was.
And it's going to be interesting to see what stays in somebody's mind. So for me, I think the thing that I was talking about was probably the smart dust. That was an interesting thing to me. I remembered the stuff about robots and the transphobia stuff. And, you know, the kind of striking things. But we had 4 hours.
Yeah.
What is that fluff?
It's so weird, isn't it? So that's what I kind of tasked Kat with finding out who is this guy and what are his ideas.
How did he come to be David Icke?
Please explain.
So, footballer. Like, pretty well known. He was doing well for himself. His arthritis made him stop playing. And at this point, I think he's on TV. He's reporting on football.
Yeah, he was a sports reporter for a while, definitely, on the BBC.
He's also, just a couple little things. So I think he's a member of the Green Party.
He wasn't just a member, he was like one of their main spokespeople. He was quite a big deal, yeah.
And he was having some, like, I think marital issues, and basically not having a good time in his life. And this is maybe the early 90s.
So he's just quit football and he's sort of starting his TV career. Yes. Is that the sort of stage we're talking about?
I think he works at the BBC.
Yeah.
And then, you know, one day he's walking down a street. He goes to a bookshop. And I think there's a report about, like, him feeling some kind of, like, spider web on his face.
I read that, yeah.
Which I couldn't really get across, but, like, I think it's, like, pulling him or drawing him towards something. And he sees a book by Betty Shine, a psychic.
A local psychic. She's a Brighton lass.
Is she really?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Oh, well, she's dead now, but she was,
damn
yeah.
It. She could have had her on the podcast. Anyway, so he reads this book, and at this point, he describes himself as basically a magnet for psychics. So synchronicities are abound. Lots of kind of weird stuff is happening to him.
Which makes sense because he's moving in that circles. Like all the environment. Well, there's a big crossover. I've noticed when I'm going to vegan events, there's a big crossover between vegans and people who are into the woo. And I imagine it's the same in environmental circles. So if you're involved in the Green Party, you probably meet a lot of people.
And it's interesting how all that works. Again, for me, moving from London to Brighton, how much my interests and, like, the stuff I consume is definitely impacted.
Yeah, it's the people who surround you and the ideas that are being,
Yeah. So he's seeing all of this. At some points, he goes to Peru. And I believe at this time, like, I don't know the order of events here, but his dad dies. He comes back from Peru after some, I would say, like, significant spiritual experiences.
Whoa, just like you had in Peru.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, am I going down this route? So he comes back.
Oh, we should tell the listeners that Kat went and did ayahuasca in Peru.
Yes. I don't know if... I believe David Icke has done ayahuasca.
Oh, really?
It's the only drug he's done. Yeah. But I don't know if it was in this particular trip.
Oh, okay. So this trip was just more pure spiritual, no drugs. Okay. What happened? Like, do you know? I heard something about standing in a circle of stones and feeling like his whole body was vibrating.
Yeah, and seeing, like, is it a turquoise stone or something that he connected with?
Again, all this stuff, it's really hard to research David Icke because everything is kind of vague. Like, you can't quite pull out concrete facts about what he's saying.
Yes.
It's like, I felt a feeling of infinite love and I felt connected to everything. And like, well, what does that mean, David?
Yeah. And also, like, these aren't uncommon experiences.
Oh no, I feel them every Tuesday.
But I mean, and again, that they are for some, and you wonder, like, what causes these, what leads to them, and just what stands out for me in this time for David Icke is just how stressful this point in his life sounds.
Yeah.
So
it sounds a bit like a breakdown.
Yeah, well, it does. And then when he comes back with his, like, kind of third wife, it was like it's very strange. Like,
he brings a wife back from Peru.
Yeah, he has, like, I think two at some point maybe 3 women living with him, which again,
nice.
Probably stressful.
He was good looking back in the day. Yeah, I can see how that could happen. Although he still is amazing how he's maintained that hair.
Yeah,
it's exactly the same mullet just a white he's had since the beginning of time. But yeah, he was a good looking guy. I can see him capturing sounds a bit harsh. Enticing 3 women.
Yeah, and at some points he kind of calls the press and says, you know, I want to start talking about what I'm experiencing, and gets on the old Terry Wogan.
Oh, that's the point where he resigns from the Green Party. Because he says, guys, I'm going to be the centre of a bit of a media firestorm. I need to resign because I don't want to draw negative attention to the Green Party.
Yeah.
So there's still a part of his brain that even though he's having all these experiences and everything's very intense and he's feeling very spiritually connected, all this stuff's going on and he's receiving all sorts of new mad information, he knows enough to know that if he goes and says this whilst he's still the spokesman, because there's only 4 spokesmen for the Green Party at this time. They don't have a main leader.
Yeah.
So it's a really important position he's in. It's kind of like a leader. If he says all this stuff whilst he's still a spokesman for the Green Party, that is going to make the Green Party look bonkers, which people already treat them like. It's sorry, again, side note, but we live in Brighton where we have a Green MP, but I think she's the only MP for the Green Party in the whole of the country. People think they're a bit, and because Brighton's a hippie town, we vote for her and we think she's amazing, and she is amazing. But generally the attitude in the UK is the Green Party are like, you're throwing away your vote if you vote for them.
Yeah.
They're a bit silly. They care about animals more than people, blah, blah, blah. Like all that stuff that people say about environmentalists. So he doesn't want to draw more negative attention to the Green Party because he doesn't want them to be the party that's already a fringe party. Plus they have this guy who believes in reptiloids.
Yeah.
So before he does his big TV appearances, he distances himself from the Green Party.
Which is interesting because that would reflect that he knows how extreme it sounds.
That's why I bring it up. It shows that he has some sort of awareness of how he sounds.
Which I would have thought a crazy person wouldn't.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So he claims to be the son of God.
Wow. Big claim.
Yeah. And it's interesting going back because I think how he will defend that now, even to this day, is he doesn't claim necessarily to be like the Jesus we know of the Bible. It's more like, I'm a son of God. I'm kind of like a version of that. And if you believe that we are all one, we're all love, you could say that, right?
Yeah, but it's kind of like...
I know that's me like trying to make it work, but...
It's a deliberately provocative thing to say. He knows how that's going to be interpreted. If he wanted to say, oh, I've had an awakening and I feel I'm connected with the divine.
He could have said that.
He could have said that.
He knows
but
that's
he
not
doesn't.
extreme
He
enough.
goes on TV and says, I'm the son of God.
He also predicts that the world will end in 1997.
That didn't work out.
Kind of didn't happen, but... Could you maybe say that the world ends basically every year? Something significantly changes, right?
Whoa. Okay.
Well, no,
that's a bit of a stretch, I feel.
Something ended this year. I mean, name like a company that ended this year. Like, things change. And one argument could be like lots of things came to an end that year.
Yeah, again, but why not just say lots of things are going to come to an end this year? But he says the world's going to end in earthquakes and fire. Which just didn't happen. I didn't mention this, but he started his show by having on the screen all the predictions he made that came true.
Oh yeah.
So he says he predicted 9/11. He predicted Bitcoin. He predicted paedophile rings being exposed in the in the BBC, not the BBC, but television, British television. Well, yeah, the BBC, but also just generally. And I was just like, this is a masterclass in how to do predictions. Predictions is such an interesting subject because they're really easy to do if you know what you're doing. So I tried to sort through this in my head and think, how would I give predictions? And I would do four techniques for predictions.
Ooh.
Vague or ill-defined predictions. So they can be interpreted many ways, like the Nostradamus stuff, like a great tower will fall on the eve of some important day. Like just vague stuff so people could say, oh, wow, that's actually the Twin Towers. Or it could just be a tower of ideas, of ideology. Or it could be interpreted in many ways. So vague or ill-defined, that's the first way to do your predictions. Unverifiable is the second one. So like you could say, people are reaching a higher level of vibration. No one can ever test that, check it, it's unfalsifiable, perfect. You can just claim it's happened. Number 3, gimmies. So there'll be an earthquake, there'll be a natural disaster, there'll be a war. These things are going to happen. Yeah. So you just say them. And then the last one is self-fulfilling prophecies. And David Icke does this. He says he got a prediction that he'd write 5 books in 5 years.
Oh,
and then he
brilliant.
Does.
I'm going to start doing that for myself.
Well,
I predict. Yeah.
This is because Count went to an astrologer recently who told her that she was going to get married by a lake.
Yeah.
Which is a great example of the self-fulfilling prophecy because now
I'm going to be looking out for lakes because I think that's a nice idea.
Exactly. So yeah, that's my top tips. If you're giving predictions, vague or ill-defined, unverifiable, gimmies, or self-fulfilling ones. That's how you do it. And that's how he does it. And it's perfect. And then what you do is you just retcon everything. So you forget the ones like he never mentions. He didn't put up on the slides at the beginning, oh, when I said the world was going to end in 1997. He just puts out the ones that he got right. He says he predicted Bitcoin. What he actually said is they're going to get rid of cash.
It's not the same thing.
And also it's not like that's, if any sensible person looking at the way that money was going, we go from, actually trading goods, like, I'll trade your cow for my corn or whatever, and then we go to tokens like cash, then we go to paper versions of those precious metals. And of course it's going to go digital. We go to cards. We go that's just common sense that's the way it's going. But the way he frames it is that he predicted Bitcoin, which sounds impressive.
It's all in the frame.
The paedophile rings is interesting because maybe he actually did because we know now that there were some horrible paedophiles at the BBC, high up in the BBC.
He could have had information about that.
Yeah, because he was working for them. So that makes a bit more sense.
It's really interesting how his media background could have influenced all of his career, which I'd like to talk to in a sec. So everything from this, let's call it a nervous breakdown, or this big reveal.
Yeah. I think he says that when my head exploded. That's how he described it on stage.
Which is nice. There's an emoji for it and everything. So between that and his first book was just a mere 5 months.
Whoa.
He whipped that one out. Like,
wait a minute. Is this from when he goes on Wogan and says he's the son of God to the first book? Or
I think so.
Wow. So he goes to Peru. He gets another
wife. It all happens
wife
very quickly.
His dad dies, you said?
Yeah, all of this stuff. I mean, again, I'm apologizing. I don't have dates for this exactly, but that is
wow. Yeah, that's
happening
intense.
all very close. I've heard stats that say that he's sold 80 million books to date. Probably more now. Probably more like maybe even 90.
Wow.
So this guy's doing.
He's prolific.
He's made an impact. So where do his ideas come from? Well, it sounds like he was just interested in. Like it sounds like a lot like how I'm discovering these ideas. You know, like
he was a seeker, just like
he
you.
was a seeker, and just recently, I was asking you about the Spiritualist Church. We went to visit one. I found out about Madame Blavatsky and this whole Theosophy Society. And again, there is maybe a certain personality type that gets drawn to these ideas, and there's also that idea of like old texts. So, and there is a weight behind oldness. So he's referring to the archons a lot, and the fact that these creatures, whatever they are seen and referred to in lots of old texts.
Well, I think he says specifically that they're referred to in the Gnostic Gospels. I don't know if they're
he
referred
loves
to
the
elsewhere.
Gnostics.
Yeah. So I haven't actually looked into that, but what I imagine, and this is just speculation, and it might sound like I'm being a bit of a dick, but this is generally what happens if you start looking into these things. You'll find that, the word archons is used, but it's used in reference to something that is not what he's talking about. So they'll be talking, they'll be like, oh, there were these angelic beings called the archons. And blah,
they
blah, blah.
weren't necessarily bad.
Yeah, and they did this and that and whatever. And then he'll read it and he'll just pick out the word archons and the fact that they came from the sky.
And they'll smush it in with his
smush it in and add reptiles, and you've got his whole philosophy.
And it's so easily done because I've seen how I can do it with myself. So let's say, I think the Archon story, it sounds a lot like the classic, there are these planets in the sky which can be seen with the visible eye. They look strange and bright and
mysterious,
weird. And we're great storytellers. That's a human skill. It's like one of our innate traits. And to assign personalities to these planets, it's easily done. And you can see that across cultures.
So what's the story? Can you give us the Archon story?
Not really, but I can tell you that they were basically assigned planets. So including, so we've got the 7 planets and / luminaries. So, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the Moon, and the Sun. And they have other names in the Archon language, or the Gnostics
of course
have different names for them. Obviously, the Greeks have different names for them. But the 8th planet is basically called Sophia. Or sorry, Sophia the Archon lives on the 8th planet.
She's like one individual? Or?
Yeah. And that's kind of like the god of gods. That is...
Oh, I heard reference to her. So she's like the one who made the Archons.
Yeah, that's the impression I got. And in a similar way that it's kind of like, she was the thing that started it all.
Yeah.
Which again, is that just not an allegory for the Big Bang and everything kind of came out of that?
It's the classic problem of like pushing it back one, because like if you talk to Christians and you say, oh, that's all very interesting that God made the earth, but who made God?
Yeah. And then you just have to come up with a final thing.
Yeah. At some point they have to say, no, this God has just always existed since the beginning of time. I guess that's the role that Sophia plays in this. Like Sophia made the Archons made us. No. Did Sophia make us?
Don't know.
Okay. Well,
I'm sorry. I really couldn't look into this much further.
No, this is not a detriment to your research skills because it's incredibly
so
hard.
So this is the other thing. What I tried to, rather than researching the Archons in general, was what David Icke has said about them. So without reading his tomes, it is quite hard because I think when he does these talks, which I think is how people are experiencing a lot nowadays on YouTube, you don't really get to these answers. And, you know, somehow we go from archons being these kind of like you said, kind of like half gods, or half other
demigods.
Yeah. And half people. They're kind of like, he uses words like inorganic, cyborgs, robots.
Yeah, reptile. I mean, that's why the reptiles thing, because he said that reptiles are like, they don't have any emotions.
They're not flesh. They're not like our reptiles.
Yeah,
but
the reason why they look like reptiles, maybe, or the reason why whatever we perceive them as reptiles, is because they're emotionless, like reptiles. They're kind of mechanical, like reptiles. They're sort of robot-like.
Yeah,
and they just operate purely on instinct. They're not creative. They don't have love or anything like that. And they need us because they feed on fear, negative emotions. Yeah.
What's really interesting is how David has kind of like twisted this story, or multiple stories from the past, into being something that is threatening to us now. So there's this idea of them having no intentionality, right? Which to me says, just like a lot of like gods and goddesses referred to in these old texts, they were neither good nor bad. Yeah. They just kind of were, and they acted out. And how David Icke translates no intentionality is to no creativity, which is really weird. And he's kind of like saying, because they're not like us, because they're not like inherently good, but also not inherently evil. He is saying that they're inherently evil.
Yeah, and there's this, when he was talking, he came back to this couple of times. He was talking about sociopaths, and there was a strong implication that sociopaths are actually reptiloids. At least that's the impression I got, that if someone's a sociopath, they're not really a human being.
Yes, what was it? It's like either good or...
Yeah, good people, okay people, and sociopaths. Yeah. He says in every group of people, you'll find, if you look at Jews, it's always Jews. If you look at Jews, if you look at Christians, if you look at whatever, you'll find good people, okay people, and sociopaths.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting because he doesn't allow for the idea of bad people.
Yes.
According to the New York Times, Grammy Award trophies are made out of a custom metal alloy called Gramium. They were designed by master mold maker John Billings.
Fascinating. Thank you, Google. I think we should keep that in.
Okay.
Well, that's an example. Like, Google's always listening, right?
Oh my God. I was just thinking about that question.
Granium.
So basically, everything that I've come to see is that no wonder he's come to the conclusion that infinite love is the only truth. Because he can't, by putting that out there as like the solution to all of the things that he's saying now, you can't measure it, you can't disprove it. And unlike the predictions that he used to make, I don't think he makes them anymore.
Very wise.
Yeah.
He hasn't got my 4-point prediction
This isn't specific.
plan.
They can't touch you if he's talking about infinite love.
Yeah.
So I think that's also why with what we saw of him, we didn't get the details on the archons because it's not helpful to people.
Do you think also maybe it puts people off?
I think so.
Like that's a bridge too far for some of his audience.
It totally is, and it's almost like I'm sure if you wanted more information about the archons, you could definitely go back into his literature and really geek out on that. I clearly didn't. I clearly got the surface
But the
stuff.
basic thing is there's archons, they're reptiloid extraterrestrials, they come to the planet Earth to feed on our fear, and then they use this 9-point plan to set everything up so we're feeling all scared and disoriented so they can feed even more.
And this idea has been pieced together from old text. So it's really easy to say, and I think I even said this to you the other day, oh, he is referring to old texts. And it's like, not quite. He's almost using them as inspiration.
Yeah, it's called cherry picking. It's a classic thing of just, you've got an idea. And it's really interesting because, like, this is a bad admission to make, but it's true. When I was an undergraduate writing English literature essays, I'd read a book and then I'd come up with an idea. Like, one of my favourite books was Jane Eyre, and I'd come up with an idea that Bertha Rochester, the mad woman in the attic, represents the dark side of Jane Eyre. That's my idea. It's not a particularly original idea. Lots of people have had that idea. But I come up with that as like a little story that I've thought of whilst I was reading the book. And then I just go through the original text of Jane Eyre with that thought in mind and highlight everything that supports it, ignore anything that doesn't support it, and then write an essay using those quotations.
Yeah.
And that's how the human brains work.
And it's really satisfying to go through
really
that
satisfying,
information.
yeah. But it's exactly the opposite of how science works, because how science works is you come up with an idea about how something might be, and then you look for evidence to disprove it, you test your theory. So if I was engaging with English literature in a skeptical, scientific way, I'd come up with my theory that Bertha Rochester represents the dark side of Jane Eyre, and then I'd go through and look for evidence that suggests that's not true to test it, to see if it's for real. But that is the exact opposite of what David Icke's doing.
No one wants to do that.
Yeah, super boring and unnatural to us. I mean, that's why science is hard, because it makes us think in a way that is not like intuitive.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm kind of like, I want to talk about what this appeals to, because I'm thinking a lot about, why do people take this, and why do some people reject it?
Well, you've got to read this book that I read. It's called Suspicious Minds, Why We Believe Conspiracy Theories by Rob Brotherton.
So tell me why. Why am I so susceptible to them?
It's amazing. So basically, he goes through and looks at all the main biases that contribute to someone being the sort of person who gets into conspiracy theories. But what's really cool about his book is that he points out that these are just human traits that we all have. This is not like some weirdos who believe weird stuff. This is just a perfect constellation. Like if all of these things are operating in a person together. And it's a really good book, and he brings up lots of stuff, so I can't do it justice here. He talks a lot about confirmation bias, which is unsurprising. We've talked about that before. And he talks about what's called in the psychologists studying the psychology of conspiracy theories, they call it the sinister attribution error, which is, there's this thing called the fundamental attribution error, which is basically we think that other people have more intention than we do. So if someone cuts you off in traffic, you think he's doing that because he's a dick.
Don't you mean they have more intention than they actually have?
Yes. Yeah, but also more than we do. So if someone cuts you off in traffic, you think, oh, he's doing that because he's a dick. But if you cut someone off in traffic, it's just, I'm in a hurry, I wasn't thinking.
But it's not having more intention, it's having a different intention.
Yeah, it's like their
malicious
action
intention.
reflects something about their personality, but it doesn't necessarily have to be malicious.
Yeah.
Like if a child goes over and like pats a dog, you think, oh, that child's so sweet and compassionate. Oh, what a wonderful child. When you don't know what's going on.
If that person looks at me in the street, they fancy me. No, they don't. I've got something up my nose.
Exactly. So you attribute the action and you create a whole personality in your head of what that person is like. And we do this all the time. And the sinister attribution error is basically, if in doubt, they're probably doing it because they hate me.
Yeah.
So I had this experience the other day at a restaurant. I was talking to my friends and I was waving my hands around as I do when I talk. And the woman came up to serve us and took our order and stuff. And she was super friendly and she complimented my t-shirt and everything was going well. And I thought, oh, brilliant. What a lovely lady. And then she came back and I was waving my hands around talking about some shit. And she came over and suddenly she was just seemed really angry and distracted and short with us and was like hurrying us through our orders and just being really brusque. And I was like, oh my God, maybe she thought that I was like doing an impression of someone, like I was being offensive somehow with my silly hand gestures or something. Like, because in my head, I'm thinking this must be about me. Yeah. The reason she's now come back to our table.
Trying to find some possible thing.
Exactly. And I was thinking, I didn't say anything mean. I don't think I've been swearing more than usual. Why is she upset with me? Oh, it must be because I was doing this weird thing with my hands and she thought I was taking the piss out of someone. Anyway, probably realistically, something had happened in her life because newsflash, people have their own lives. It's not all about you. But yeah, the sinister attribution error is when you assume that the person's doing something bad and they're probably out to get you.
Right.
And evolutionary speaking, it makes perfect sense because the people who assume the worst survive and pass on their genetic material. So
I think you cherry-picked that example, but I think that's brilliant.
The other ones that he comes up with, I'll just go through a couple because I can't, as I said, it's a great book. I can't go through all of them. Another one he talks about is proportionality bias, which is basically the idea that big events need big causes. So classic example is when Kennedy was shot. Like the story of just one guy who's a bit of a nut, Lee Harvey Oswald, who just decides to shoot him because, he's whatever's going on with him mentally. That's kind of, it's like this one little guy, he's not a big deal, and he kills a president? That seems wrong. More, what our brains would prefer is the things to be proportional. Yeah. So if a president is going to die, you want like a big conspiracy to make it feel equal.
So, and with 9/11, it's kind of like, it's so big. Let's get more elaborate on
you have to go huge, and that's what we find. And again, it's like it's one of these things that makes kind of instinctive sense. If you see a big effect in the world, you assume there was a big cause. But in the case of conspiracies, it actually often doesn't make sense because big events happen just through randomness or chance or lots of little things.
It's our rejection of random. It's our rejection of things without meaning.
Well, this is exactly, David Icke says pseudo randomity. Like there's nothing is random, everything is planned.
it's
That's much
so
more
funny how
comforting.
he's somehow aware of these like biases, but he like uses them.
Yeah. It's almost tempting to think that he is like, maybe he is Rob Brotherton, the guy who wrote this book. It's like his alter ego, because he's using all the tricks.
Let's make that work.
Like, it's like he read this book and then he's using them. So the really good examples on proportionality bias is there are like failed assassination attempts or times when a plane had some trouble but ended up saving itself. No one comes up with conspiracies about them, even though it's the same thing, right? It's someone trying to kill a president. And if they were successful and they killed the president, then people come up with loads of conspiracy theories about it. But if they were unsuccessful, no one even thinks about it. They just accept the official explanation.
Yeah.
Because the big event didn't happen, so you're not searching for a big cause. But as soon as the big event happens, people start looking for the big cause. So that's another one. The other one we talked about, openness, and particularly the rejecting conventional wisdom.
But that in itself, like, that isn't an end. I want to know, why do some people want to reject? Why are some people rebels?
Who knows what that is? Maybe that's just like a personality trait that you're born with, or maybe it's something to do with your upbringing. I don't know.
Because I wonder how in evolutionary, sorry, I'm just like spitballing, but like in evolutionary psychology, how would that work? This idea that you're rejecting the norm, therefore, maybe it's that thing that drives you to go out and search for a better solution.
Yeah.
Okay, so, steel, whatever the order of metals came, but bronze wasn't so great. Let's look for something better.
And all the boring people are just like, oh well, bronze is perfectly fine. I don't know what you're going on about.
And then the people who did better were the ones who like had these amazing discoveries.
Maybe you need a certain percentage of those people in any culture.
Population.
Yeah,
that would work.
Yeah. I like the other one he talked about is the idea that the more disenfranchised you are, the more conspiracies you believe in.
Okay, and that seems very evident.
Yeah, and I've read this before in general theories of the psychodynamic model of paranormal belief, which is something I'm super into. It's basically trying to explain why people, because I'm trying to understand myself, because I used to believe in a lot of these things. Not like I'm analysing other people, it's actually more like an internal thing. But yeah, so the more disenfranchised you feel, less control you feel you have over your life, the more likely you are to invest in stories which give you the idea that there is some order to the world.
Yeah. And
that your feeling of disenfranchisement and not having control is actually legit. Like, it's not just that you're having a hard time when you're a bit of a loser. It's actually, there's a bunch of reptiles conspiring to control you.
Yeah. And the only problem with that is, like, the conclusion is generally there's not much you can do about that.
It's like a vicious circle.
Yeah.
Because if you're like, oh, my life is rubbish, I don't have anything going for me, everything sucks. And someone might say, well, pull your socks up, sort it out, go and do some self-improvement stuff, which might or might not work, but at least it's something you can do. But David Icke will say, well, that's because of the reptiloids.
Yeah.
So, and then you feel even more disenfranchised and you just go down and down. And they have done studies on this, and they find, especially African Americans, high percentage of conspiracy belief in those communities because they're disenfranchised.
Right.
No surprise. Like, you put people in a situation where they don't have control and they make up these grand narratives. So that's just like, how many? It's like 4 or 5 biases that if they're put together in your brain and they come together in the right constellation, you're more likely to believe in conspiracy theories. But this is my grand theory of why David Icke is the way he is. So there was a sort of throwaway comment in the book, the conspiracy theory book. He was quoting Paul Zawadzki. He said that one can say that conspiracy theories have brought the devil back. And I was like, ooh, that's an interesting idea. And I've always been interested in the problem of evil, which is a classic theological problem, which is like, if God is like this omnipresent, omnibenevolent, omnipowerful, potent, thank you, guy, like making everything.
Why is there bad stuff in the world?
Exactly. That's the problem of evil. Why is there bad stuff in the world if he's so good? And the answer that Christians give is, well, the devil did it. Or free will.
Yeah, free will.
But they have to find some excuse for why there's bad stuff in the world. David Icke believes that in every group of people, there are good people, okay people, and reptiloids.
Yeah.
Or sociopaths, as some people call them.
I'm with you.
Right?
A few places. The first one is Alloy Wheels, Directed Beechcroft, Everley Road, Paxton, Salisbury. The second one is Direct R Lois at 145 to 157 St John Street.
Okay, you might like talking to me about Satan. Would you like to give it a go?
So Paul Sadat, whatever, I can't pronounce his name, said this thing about conspiracy theories bringing the devil back.
Yes.
I was like, that's interesting, problem of evil. David Icke genuinely believes that there aren't bad people.
Yeah.
David Icke is like, if you believe that people are inherently good, or at least not evil, then you need an explanation for why bad things happen. You have the problem of evil. And his answer, instead of the devil or free will, is reptiloids. This is a solution to his problem. He wants to believe in humanity being good and wonderful and love and all this stuff, but he can't because he keeps seeing, and he said this 3 times, he made some reference to, how can you be a good person, a self-aware person, how can you be a person, basically, if you just go and pepper pot bomb sort of civilians?
Yeah.
I've never heard this phrase, pepper pot bomb, before, but he used it 3 times. And he kept on coming back to it. How can you be a good person if you would do this to other people?
He's struggling with the problem of evil.
Yeah. And he's found a solution. And it's an unconventional one, but it's actually an unsurprising one, because it's exactly the same problem that theologians have struggled with for centuries.
Yeah.
And often the solution is the devil.
Yeah.
And his solution is reptiloids.
Same thing.
Basically the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, this is an interesting thing about like what it all comes down to. And I'd be interested to know what your general conclusions are on, well, first of all, like his legitimacy as a person, because one of the arguments that some people might make is the things that he is saying, he doesn't actually believe, and that this is all a money-making scheme, and that he has a lot of media training, and he kind of knew what he was doing from the start.
Yeah.
And this is just a really... In fact, even as I'm saying it, it sounds so crazy. Like, that sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory.
Yeah. I'm inclined to think that he believes the majority of what he says.
I do too.
Yeah. And maybe I've just been won over him because he is very charming.
He is.
And he just seems like such a genuine person. I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, he has done well out of it. That's undeniable.
And it is like... he's that first book, for example, it is like, okay, he wrote that really quickly. He's had been researching this stuff for a while, in the same way that, we're casually looking into these different like, esoteric things.
And then suddenly you sit down with a conversation with someone and you're like, oh, I'm doing this podcast about, paranormal and spiritual stuff. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. What about this? And suddenly you realize that you actually know quite a lot about it because you've been researching it. And you can start fitting the pieces together and go, oh yeah, that thing that we heard about in the spiritualist church actually makes sense because that's about theosophy, and theosophy is referenced in David Icke, and like suddenly you start seeing the connection.
And if you didn't have to work because you had all your money from being a footballer, you would just be able to bust that out, and that's all you'd be doing. You'd just be writing.
Yeah,
it's not hard to believe.
Yeah, I think I don't know. I think he probably,
So basically, we do believe in David Icke, which I think we can agree on.
Yeah, we don't believe in the reptiloids. Although, that's my question to you. Do you believe in the reptiloids?
No. I would lean on the side of no. I would say that what is useful is how he is getting us to question things. You could say that. Like, this is definitely, it's being skeptical about the reality we live in.
Yeah, but it's like guided skepticism, isn't it? The whole point of skepticism is you're supposed to like look at everything impartially.
Sure.
Whereas what he's doing is questioning everything, but he already knows the answer.
Right. Yeah. So say if you were to stop at the questioning, which I think is a healthy thing. I do believe in thinking, okay, so I don't know about this 5G thing. Could I look into it further if it's something that I could potentially be concerned about? Like, it is asking questions. I do think it's encouraging the general population to question things. I also think that his message is fantastic. Like, again, it doesn't matter if he's right or not. Saying that the answer is love and harmony, I can't say that isn't going to be a helpful thing, especially to people who are disenfranchised who can't do anything else.
Yeah, although on that point of like, is a positive message, but it really worries me. So I watched The Lizards and the Jews, the John Ronson documentary, ages ago.
That worried me about John Ronson. Just saying.
You thought he was mean?
Mean.
Aw, I love John Ronson. Anyway, another subject.
Episode.
Another talk for another time. But that documentary is specifically dealing with the accusations of anti-Semitism that David Icke has had from the beginning. And when I watched that documentary, I hadn't really read any David Icke at all. I just watched it because it was John Ronson. I love John Ronson. And by the end of that, I was like, oh, these people are being so mean to David Icke. He's such a misunderstood nutter, and he's obviously not an anti-Semite, and he genuinely believes when he says reptiloids, he means reptiloids.
And this is the thing, people say, oh, he doesn't really mean that. It's like, he literally means reptiles. He's saying that Jews aren't reptiles. Like, it's a very strange thing when somebody is saying something and other people are saying, you don't mean that. You are speaking in code.
Yeah.
What do you do with that?
It's really difficult. But I'm a bit more sensitive to the, like, maybe not sensitive, I'm a bit more sympathetic to the people who worry about his anti-Semitism now that I've done a bit more research on it.
Oh.
Because I don't necessarily think he's an anti-Semite. In fact, I'm pretty sure he's not. But, and this is going to sound really, like, vague and maybe a bit, I don't know, but there's a general vibe.
There is a vibe.
And it's a vibe about picking on people who are in, like, trans people,
Yeah.
you know, they're already an out group.
Also, and people who are immigrating, like,
immigrants.
It's
That's another.
really
Yeah.
overtly anti-immigration.
Yeah, so he never says anything like, oh, I don't like immigrants, immigrants are bad people, or I don't like Jews, Jews are bad people, I don't like trans people are bad people. But you could definitely leave with that sort of sense.
Yeah, of the outsider, the other is a threat. The new is a threat.
And if you had that already going on in your head, and then it's confirmed by him up on the stage,
Yeah.
and the anti-Semitism accusations don't come out of nowhere. I read there's a chapter in, which book is it? I can't remember. There's a chapter in one of his books which is all devoted to, it's chapter 7 of The Biggest Secret. He's talking about the Holocaust. And again, he doesn't say, he's basically questioning the official narrative,
Right.
which, as you say, question everything. That's a good thing. But the way it's done, he basically says that, so I'll give you a quick summary of chapter 7 of The Biggest Secret. He says the Holocaust did happen and it was horrible, but the details have been exaggerated or misrepresented to serve a Zionist agenda. And this is one of the things he keeps saying. I don't mind Jews, it's Zionists that upset me. And so then he goes on to say that, like, Israeli politics are manipulated by the bloodline, which is the reptiloids, and they use Israel to do their dirty work. And I'm like, okay, so maybe you believe that, but why are you saying that about Israel? You think that about every country. So why focus on Israel?
Yeah.
Like, that's weird. He also says that the smear of anti-Semite is used by those in power to discredit anyone who gets too close to the truth. And the really kind of really bad news thing that he does is he references the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is this, like, it's actually, it's from Russia. And basically there were these horrible pogroms back in Russia way before World War II, and, like, the Nazis picked it up. And this leaflet, it's like, I don't know how long it is, but apparently it's not that long. It's supposed to be, it's obviously a hoax, and it was debunked in, like, the 1920s or something. But it's a leaflet that is supposed to be like the minutes of a meeting of all these evil Jewish overlords getting together going like, ha ha ha, how are we going to rule the world? And they started passing it around. All the anti-Semites were loving this, obviously. And then that was one of the many pieces of literature that sort of added up to the pogroms in Russia and supported those. Yeah. And then Hitler picks it up later and he's like, oh, this matches what I think about the Jews too. I'm going to start spreading this around. After it had been debunked, Henry Ford in America is having this reprinted and circulating it. It's a really like nasty, insidious text.
It's almost like you can imagine like school kids like ganging up on somebody.
Yeah.
So what is he quoting it directly? Is he saying
No, what he's saying is when they, and this is really ironic, in the Protocols of Zion, when they say Jews, they mean reptiloids.
Oh, interesting.
He's flipped it. Yeah.
Even though that has been debunked. Interesting.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of this comes down to it's just to cover up stuff. So it's like saying, okay, because it's been debunked, we can't trust that because you've cherry picked that idea. If it was shown as legitimate, he'd be like, oh, well, it's legitimate. It's this idea of like just twisting any kind of reality, and it's exactly what people do back to him.
Yeah, so flirting with like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion and all these like anti-Semitic, racist things. I don't know what his game is or why he's doing this, but he does seem to be doing it a lot. And that means that there's a possibility for white supremacists to be like, oh, this is our guy.
Yeah.
There's a famous review of one of his live shows by a group called Combat 18. They have a newsletter or something. They're some weird little neo-Nazi British group. And this is such a good review. The review says, it was a good speech. He began by talking about a big conspiracy of bankers, media moguls, etc. He was always clever enough not to mention what all these people have in common. Salt beef sandwich, anyone? So the neo-Nazis are coming along to the David Icke show and enjoying it because they think
he's a Nazi.
Yeah, and whether he is or not, is kind of irrelevant because he's
they're
still stoking up their anger and rage
Yeah.
and even suggesting new targets for their rage. Like, you guys, you already hate the Jews. Why not start hating trans people as well?
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like, regardless of what David Icke believes, which I genuinely think he believes in the reptiles, how people take this can be very detrimental.
And it's hard because I can imagine if you're a protester, if you're a part of one of the groups, so the group that was protesting in Manchester or wherever it was, and that was supposed to be coming to protest the event that we went to, they're called Momentum. They're like a Labour Party organisation. And they say, they have this really short video. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. They have a really short video that sort of sums up. And it's just not true. They basically say, David Icke thinks that Jews are lizards. And that's, I mean, it's a simplification. They obviously haven't read his work. But the concern that I have about David Icke and the way that he is making life difficult for maybe Jewish people, definitely trans people, immigrants, is kind of nebulous and vague, and it's hard to put across in like a placard. Like, how do you express, I'm concerned about this guy because I think, knowingly or unknowingly, he's stoking unpleasant, potentially violent feelings in his audience. That doesn't make a good placard.
I think it's because it's much easier for most people who see themselves as generally good to be vague about the things and the people that they're scared of. Because I do think all of this comes down to the fear of the foreign, the unknown.
Yeah.
I don't mean foreign people. It's just like the other, which is an old fear.
Yeah.
And the more specific you can get, so Nazis are basically doing it really consciously and really specifically. David Icke is doing it a lot more vaguely, but it's still like taking generalized fear and kind of putting it through a certain lens. And if you continue down that path, you end up with Nazis, which is dangerous. But my only thing is like, okay, so David Icke is doing this. Are these people going to be picking up on this stuff anyway? Like, if David Icke wasn't there, are they just going to be hating on foreigners anyway because it's in the Daily Mail? Like,
yeah, I did think this. I thought that about the Combat 18 review. I was like, the thing is, if you're a neo-Nazi, there's not many of them, thankfully, and there's certainly no neo-Nazis on TV. So, of course, they're going to have to pick mainstream things and say, oh, this is actually... It's like the reverse. So the people protesting David Icke say he's dog whistling. He's saying coded horrible things about Jewish people. And from the Combat 18 side, they're like, he's dog whistling. He's telling us what secretly he's saying, oh, I hate Jews, but he can't say that. So everyone's interpreting what David Icke is saying to either hate him or love him.
Which is just what happened with Jesus.
Oh God, it always comes back to Jesus.
Just proving that what he said was true back in the day.
So that's my main like harm, and we're sort of coming to like summing up. I'd say that's, and it's not satisfying because I can't say, look, here's where he's causing direct harm, but it's a general feeling that what he's saying, although he never says Jews are evil, trans people are evil, immigrants are evil, but he implies it heavily in places. Yes. And I mean, you
don't walk away being like, oh, I bet he really loves like, he's not doing that.
Yeah, definitely.
His best mates aren't Jewish. Like,
that's what the feeling I have. And at the end of the John Ronson documentary, they have a bit where I think John Ronson, he doesn't record this, he just reports this, but the people who are organising David Icke and like helping him out and setting up his tech and stuff are talking to each other. David Icke isn't there, and they don't realise John Ronson's there, and they're talking about the protest, which didn't happen or went awry somehow. The people who were protesting and calling him an anti-Semite. And these organisers, David Icke's organisers, chatting amongst themselves, and one of them says, the fat Jew fucked up.
Oh no.
So there are definitely anti-Semitic people who are associated with David Icke. Yeah. Doesn't mean he's an anti-Semite, but it's certainly troubling.
Yes.
Lots of things to be troubled about in this episode.
So,
but the positive thing, like if we had to say what's good about him, what I really like about him, is all the stuff about how like I went through the fires of public embarrassment and humiliation, and I came out stronger and able to say my own truth. Yeah. I read this great book called The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson. Yeah, so good. Yeah. And I think get that from Mark Manson, don't get that from David Icke. But the message of like, you know, not caring quite so much about what other people think of you and focusing on the things that are important to you and not paying too much attention to the things that people say you should be doing, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I'm trying because that's the thing, he's charming, and interpersonally I think I would get on with him at a pub. Yeah. So I don't want to end on a note of this guy's bad news.
Well, it's interesting. So a lot of the things that we have covered so far on the podcasts we've done, like my general conclusion tends to be it's better that it exists, or at least it's neutral that it exists, compared to it not existing. Because I think there are all these great things you can get from these people. This is one where I'm like, I really like this person, but his ideas are probably doing more harm than good.
Yeah. Yes. That's a really good way to sum it up. That's pretty much how I feel too.
Yeah.
And it's sad. Because he genuinely seems like an interesting, creative, amazing guy.
You know what I think we could do? I think we could help him. Just tailor his message a little bit more. Take out the racist stuff, all of that. Take out the anti-trans stuff, like all of that. And then just leave the like nice love stuff and
make it a bit more actionable.
And a bit more actionable. There you go.
Yeah, so if you're listening, David Icke, and you've got to the end of this, one of our longest episodes of our podcast, we would love to do your PR / massage your message a little bit. Get in touch.
Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Let us know with a tweet or an email. We'd love to hear about your experiences.
Yes, please tell us what we got wrong. You can email us at hello@seekerandskeptic.com and follow us on Twitter @seekerskeptic.
You'll find the show notes for this and every episode at seekerandskeptic.com.
And you can find my skeptically themed comics at rebeccaonpaper.com or follow me on Twitter @RebeccaOnPaper.
And I'm at Yogis Who Shave on Twitter, and you can find me bringing secular yoga to the masses at yogiswhoshave.com.
If you like what you heard and fancy supporting the show and spreading the word, we'd really appreciate a rating and review in the Apple Podcast Store.
Or tell somebody you know about the show.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
To the A, to the VID, to the ICK, to the motherfucking E. Some say he's nuts, but this is his story. Was in a Green Party and he's never been a Tory. Read sports news on the BBC and always looked a bit like David Gower to me. Check out his website, read his headlines. Talks about lizards controlling our minds. They ain't very nice, what they do isn't good. And I think he said they're called the Babylonian Brotherhood.
Was it a great shock for you to discover this at 38?
Well, I think the word is gobsmacked. David Icke. David Icke. David Icke. David Icke.
Okay, Dave, I bet you got some funny looks, but big respect, son, you've written 18 books. You might still diss him and say that he's shitty. Have you ever been a goalie for Coventry City? No, I don't think so, son, unless you're Kieran Westwood or Chris Dunn. Either way, let's get back to the tale. It goes with conspiracy like hammers to a nail.
We are all one infinite consciousness. David Icke. David Icke.
He was in a newsagents back in 1989 when he saw a book written by a bird called Betty Shine. She was a psychic, she came from Brighton. When he read her words, he seemed to turn a light on. He knew then he'd been given a sign that the cosmic chakra was badly misaligned. I'm the son of God became his slogan, but they took the piss when he stepped up to Wogan. His ideas might be hit or miss, but he introduced the world to the reptoid hypothesis. It's the reason why they say he's a wacko, because of massive lizards from the constellation Draco. You might find it funny like Morecambe and Wise, but I loved it when he said he'd only dress in turquoise. I fucking love him, and here's another tip. According to Dave, the moon is actually a spaceship.
What we call David Icke and Ethel Jones are just different points of observation of their consciousness. David